Picture this. Earth is 4.5 billion years old today. The oldest humans started existing 7 million years ago. Modern humans? 300,000 years ago. Now do the math. Who occupied planet Earth before humans came into existence? Was it empty? Perhaps we would have agreed on that, except that the Silurian hypothesis came into play. In 2018, two scientists teamed up to make the world question all they knew about Earth's history. With a mind-boggling proposal, they fearlessly posed the big question. Was there an ancient civilization before us? What if Earth wasn't home to just one advanced civilization but many? And if there were others, what if all traces have been wiped away? For centuries, we have thought of ourselves as unique, the pinnacle of evolution. While this belief seems to hold water, the Silurian hypothesis suggests otherwise. First proposed in 2018 by scientists Adam Frank and Gavin A. Schmidt, this idea was published in a paper titled The Silurian Hypothesis. Would it be possible to detect an industrial civilization in the geological record? The paper suggests that not only did an advanced breed exist before us, but geological processes must have erased all evidence of their existence. What started as a mere idea of civilization before us quickly transformed into concerning questions about their remains. Think about it. Imagine that the whole of humanity disappears today. How long would it take for all evidence of our existence to follow suit? Scientists peg it at a few thousand years. Our formidable skyscrapers would crumble, plastics would degrade, even our radioactive waste would fade. If all traces of our seemingly magnificent presence could disappear in a few thousand years, what do you think happened to the civilizations before us? Could we humans just be the latest chapter in a much older story? But before we answer that, where did the name Silurian come from? Enter the Silurian period. About 443 to 419 million years ago, in the third and shortest period of the Paleozoic era, scientists believed that life existed in Earth's oceans. However, there was zero evidence of intelligent life. To add to that, astrophysicist Adam Frank and climate scientist Gavin Schmidt thought it would be nice to pass a wink to Doctor Who.
Remnant of a bygone age on planet Earth.
Remember that sci-fi series where the fictional Silurians were an advanced reptilian species that lived before humans? Yes, that's them. Combining the idea of whether an ancient civilization lived before humans, plus the theory of life existing in the far Silurian period, the Silurian hypothesis began to make sense.
This land is ours. We lived here long before the apes.
But Frank and Schmidt's paper didn't stop there. Their thought experiment explored whether such ancient civilizations left any recognizable traces of their existence. Their conclusion? Probably not. Why, you ask? It's because geological processes like plate tectonics, erosion, and fossilization are so powerful that they could erase all physical evidence of an ancient society. Frank and Schmidt argued that instead of looking for a smoky Silurian picture or any other absurd physical proof, we better start searching for chemical fingerprints in the Earth's crust. And for a generation of humans with trust issues, this can be hard to do. Imagine abandoning your search for actual lizard folks to focus on anomalies in the carbon cycle. But in a short while, you'll see why these scientists thought that this would be the best approach. Did you know that planet Earth is ever restless? Like a string of hormonal mood swings, Earth has a dynamic nature that leaves both archaeologists and geologists in wonder. Here is why. Today's oceans can become tomorrow's mountains, and the mountains you see today could later become habitable residential areas for humans. The Earth is constantly reshaping its surface and changing its geological history. And she does this through geological processes, erosion, tectonics, volcanism, fossilization, you name it. Let's take plate tectonics, for instance. Earth's crust is made of plates that move slowly, collide, and sink into areas called subduction zones. That is far beneath the surface you are currently standing on. Our planet is having a makeover, but it's so slow you can't feel a thing. However, over millions of years, the impact of this process is seen. Gradually, Earth's crust becomes recycled, destroying any evidence of ancient structures or cities that may have existed. That's right, this same slow process is currently ongoing to wipe out proof of our existence millions of years from now. You don't believe it? Then how come the oldest oceanic crust on Earth is about 200 million years old? Think about it. Even on land, we watch the forces of erosion gradually wear down mountains and bury valleys. Before our eyes, natural forces like water and wind work to reshape Earth's surface year after year. And when it's neither plate tectonics nor erosion, fossilization takes the lead. Under the relentless pressure of nature, even concrete and metal degrade. So, what is left behind? In the rocks presently available to us, only a fraction of Earth's history is preserved within. With such geological processes constantly repeating themselves, there is a high chance that entire eras have been wiped clean. If an advanced civilization did exist millions of years ago, its machines, roads, and skyscrapers would have been ground into dust and redistributed across the planet. But if all evidence of an ancient industrialized society has been wiped off, what do Frank and Schmidt's thought experiments rely on? Since we agree on the fact that geological processes must have eliminated physical proof of their existence, the scientists played on the kind of evidence that cannot be wiped away. Non-physical explanations. When the desirable is not available, the available becomes desirable. This is the theory Frank and Schmidt held close as they drafted their paper. If direct evidence like artifacts or structures used by Silurians have been obliterated by natural processes, how about chemical fingerprints? Surely chemical signatures embedded in the Earth's crust could serve as subtle indicators of past industrial activities, couldn't it? Take, for example, abnormal isotopic ratios. If an industrialized civilization did occupy the Earth before us, they must have engaged in industrial processes like fossil fuel combustion. And if they did, it would have altered the natural level of carbon isotopes. Carbon-12 would become significantly higher than carbon-13. And where else to find such anomalies than the sedimented layers of Earth's crust? And if the ancient civilizations did use nitrogen-based fertilizers for their farms, that is, if we assume they did farm, there would also be anomalies in nitrogen-15 levels. These abnormal levels within the Earth's crust might point to the possibility of synthetic fertilizer production long before humans came to be. But this is not the only way suggested by the curious scientists. Frank and Schmidt took the Silurian hypothesis a notch higher when they stopped to ask, what if the ancient society fought nuclear wars too? Wait, what? That's pushing the boundaries for a civilization that we aren't sure of their existence to start with. But imagine that this advanced society did create nuclear weapons. If they did, then there could be radiological evidence lurking beneath Earth's surface as well. How so? The answer lies in radioactive isotopes. If nuclear reactions were indeed used by the Silurians for energy production or the production of weapons, there would be traces of radioactive isotopes. Take, for example, plutonium-244 and iodine-129 have extremely long half-lives and are not commonly found in nature. If scientists could detect their presence in geological layers, voila, we would be onto evidence of past nuclear technology use. But if scientists still missed such evidence, Frank and Schmidt had one more up their sleeves. What if the industrial civilization burned fossil fuels so much that they released excess amounts of carbon dioxide into the atmosphere? In turn, global warming happened. Hard to believe, right? However, the scientists posed as many absurd angles as they could to find traces of an advanced society that existed millions of years before humans. But while these suggested tests show the possibility of past industrial activity, there is a twist. Even natural processes can produce similar evidence. For example, volcanic eruptions can send massive amounts of carbon dioxide spiraling into the atmosphere. This could distort carbon isotope ratios as well. A good example of this is the Permian-Triassic extinction event that took place over 250 million years ago. In the blink of an eye, a massive volcano eruption led to global warming and ocean acidification. So, before you blame ancient global warming on the Silurians, consider the natural events that have also occurred within that period. In the same shoes, we know how exciting the idea of a past civilization fighting nuclear wars sounded. Imagine lizard folks all guarded on their reptilian armor, ready to shoot down an enemy lizard country. It's the perfect Doctor Who's reincarnation. But as interesting as that sounds, it might not be the case. Nearly 2 billion years ago, the Oklo natural nuclear reactors also occurred in the Oklo region of Gabon, West Africa. Although it is the first, and so far the last of its kind, astrophysicists and scientists have used it to counter the Silurian hypothesis. Even if traces of radiological evidence from past industrialized societies were found today, it might be discounted to stem from natural nuclear processes, just like the one in Oklo. Seeing that all possible tests to prove the existence of an ancient civilization have been countered, the Silurian hypothesis buddies whipped out their last card: the Paleocene-Eocene thermal maximum. Also called the PETM for short, this event occurred approximately 56 million years ago. To date, it is known as one of the most extreme global warming events in Earth's history, and for good reason. For thousands of years, global temperatures rose by 5 to 8 degrees Celsius and reached 20 degrees at the North Pole. The warming lasted over 200,000 years, releasing massive amounts of carbon into the atmosphere and causing profound environmental changes. This sparked the big question. Since the oldest humans only started existing about 7 million years ago, who or what released so much carbon into the atmosphere enough to cause the PETM? Could it be the same advanced civilization proposed in the Silurian hypothesis? This, here, was Frank and Schmidt's last card. Think about it. In the modern Anthropocene era, industrial human activity has caused a spike in carbon emissions. This has led to non-stop warnings from the government about a potential global warming event. If humans can release as much carbon into the atmosphere as the planet witnessed 56 million years ago, what is the guarantee that the PETM emission was not done by another industrial civilization like us? What if the Silurians lived a life as full as ours? Did they truly cause the PETM? Or that event is not enough proof of an advanced society before us? You guessed right. It isn't. Following Frank and Schmidt's paper, other scientists have since discredited the ancient civilization theory as the cause of the PETM. The first solid reason is that natural processes also match the evidence. The release of carbon could be traced to volcanic activity, methane hydrate destabilization, or even organic carbon release. Secondly, there is no archaeological or fossil evidence. Although we established that geological processes could have wiped away the last pieces of artifacts or fossils left by the Silurians, nothing was found in the Earth's crust corresponding to the PETM period. Lastly, the timing of carbon release during the PETM was far slower than the rate of carbon emissions caused by human activity. If the ancient breed were as advanced as the theory claimed, the carbon emissions rate would be alike. Instead, the rate of carbon release during the PETM resembles that of a natural, gradual process. With these counterarguments, down went the last card from the founders of the Silurian hypothesis. However, if the PETM event is not enough pointer to an advanced society existing before humans, other indicators still exist. Enter the dinosaurs. For years, the scientific community assumed that dinosaurs were nothing more than ferocious, lumbering creatures with little intelligence. But what if these species are far more intelligent and industrialized than we give them credit for? At first, the focus was on the Stegosaurus. Although gigantic in physique, its brain was so small that the entire species was written off as lacking intelligence. But this changed with recent studies. In 2021, one man dared to look beyond the general appraisal of dinosaurs. Paleontologist Diego Pol researched the Maiasaura species, and the results were astonishing. These species exhibited surprising intelligence and social behavior. For instance, the Maiasaura species returned to the same nesting sites year after year. This not only proved that they had a memory, but also the ability to assess the environment's comfort for their offspring. But this is not all. Pol's research also proved that the Maiasaura communities worked hand in hand to improve their living. While the males protected the nesting females and eggs, younger dinosaurs foraged for food. No doubt, this level of social organization mirrors behaviors seen in modern-day animals. They were advanced in their own way. But if you think the Maiasaura species are the closest bet to the ancient civilization hinted by the Silurian hypothesis, think again. Among all dinosaurs, the Troodon stands out as the strongest contender for advanced intelligence. For starters, this small bird-like dinosaur had a brain-to-body ratio higher than most of its contemporaries. Add to that, paleontologists deduced that its binocular vision and grasping hands could mean that the species was familiar with complex tasks like cooperative hunting. For an icing on the cake, researchers speculate that if the asteroid impact 66 million years ago had not wiped out the dinosaurs, perhaps the Troodon species might have evolved into more intelligent forms, perhaps even more intelligent than humans. To this effect, paleontologist Dale Russell quickly cooked up the dinosauroid, a theoretical evolution of Troodon into a humanoid-like creature capable of building machines and transforming culture one dinosaur at a time. How bizarre is that? Very bizarre. Although it was a speculative idea, Russell's theory flares up an interesting possibility. Could other undiscovered dinosaur species have reached a higher organizational level beyond that of the Troodon? If dinosaurs like the Troodon showed advanced intelligence, could they have laid the foundation for a civilization by themselves? Again, the lack of direct evidence in the form of tools, buildings, or artifacts does us no good. However, the Silurian hypothesis does not fail to push this idea further. If an advanced dinosaur civilization did exist, its remnants might be screaming for help as faint isotopic signatures in the geological record. It might surprise you, but what if the ancient civilization is an entity we've been overlooking over the years? Over 2 decades ago, a Japanese biologist named Toshituki Nakagaki conducted an experiment that left scientific jaws hanging in shock. The biologist placed a slime mold and a sugar cube in a maze. At first, both entities were at the far ends of the maze. In a few hours, the mold grew its threads through the maze, searching and rerouting itself until it reached the sugar. With that experiment, fungi rivaled the intelligence level of some animals, despite lacking a brain. This poses the question, could fungi have been the footing for an ancient intelligent system? If yes, their civilization might have thrived quietly, leaving no traces to be found. The list goes on. If we dare to explore some more, we might find that even the pyramids and their excellent structures are more of a question than an answer. Although agreed to have been built by the Egyptians, paleontologists beg to differ. Take a look at the Great Pyramid of Giza in Egypt. Now look at Chichen Itza Pyramid. Lastly, the Great Pyramid of Cholula in Mexico. What do you notice? All 3 pyramids were built thousands of years apart and are deduced to be built by the ancient people of each city. However, the recurrent style and patterns of these structures situated oceans apart begs the thought, Did an advanced civilization build them even before humans existed? We are just as curious. Once again, the Silurian hypothesis leaves us wondering, was there an ancient industrial civilization before us? In what form did they come? As the PETM, Trojan dinosaurs, the overlooked fungi, or the true architects of the pyramid? More importantly, are these societies all lost to geological processes? Or if we look a bit closer, their chemical fingerprints would call out to us. What do you think? In the 19th century, hot whispers about a strange idea began to make rounds. This idea challenged everything that historians believed about human civilization. Because this time, it was not about Atlantis or ancient Egypt, nor was it about Mesopotamia. It was about a continent that came before these civilizations, a lost world called Mu. And it all started with a man called Augustus Le Plongeon, a 19th century archaeologist who spent his career studying Mayan ruins. He was known for arguing about how the Yucatan civilization was older than Egypt, but no one expected this archaeologist to dig even deeper. Out of the blue, Le Plongeon claimed that a continent called Mu once existed, and ancient Egypt stemmed from it. He insisted that during his study of Mayan texts, the strange language spoke of a great civilization that preceded all known history. To make it worse, according to Le Plongeon, this great civilization was swallowed up by the sea. Le Plongeon believed that the Mayan civilization was not self-made, but rather descended from the refugees of Mu who fled after their homeland was swallowed up. However, his ideology was too radical to pursue. He could not say where this civilization once existed or what could have happened to them. And if they did exist, where was the proof of their existence? Because Le Plongeon lacked substantial proof of his belief, the whispers of Mu were soon swept under the carpet. This was until it intrigued one man, James Churchward. Suddenly, the rejected idea rose to the surface again. Why? Churchward didn't just think that Mu existed, he had proof. In 1926, a British writer published the Holy Grail of Ancient Civilizations. His name was James Churchward, and his three-part book series was titled The Lost Continent Mu, The Children of Mu, and The Sacred Symbols of Mu. In these books, Churchward told a tale that mesmerized all who heard it. With his testimony, the doubts that Mu existed were halted, page after page. According to Churchward, 50 years before he published his book, he was a soldier in India. During his service time, he befriended a high-ranking temple priest who showed him the unspeakable. That fateful day, Churchward said he was having a friendly chat with his priest friend when the conversation turned serious. The temple priest had something to show the officer, and it was unlike anything Churchward had ever seen. The priest brought out stone tablets that looked old. On these tablets there were written messages in a language that was too complex for Churchward to decipher. According to Churchward, the tablets were sunburnt, and although they looked like stone on the outside, they were built with clay. The language in the tablets was called the Naga Maya language. This was a long-lost language understood by only 2 other people in India at the time. But Churchward was interested in interpreting the message on these tablets, so he made a deal with the priest. Teach me the dead language, and I will restore and store the tablets for you. At the time, James Churchward was also known for properly storing ancient artifacts. This seemed like a good bargain to his friend, the priest. And once this deal was settled, Churchward began a difficult journey to unravel what was written on the stone tablets. When he did understand them, he wrote in his book that the tablets originated from the place where man first appeared, Mu. But that was not all. The world was not ready for the detailed description that would emerge from Churchward's understanding of the Naga Maya language on the tablets. The story on the tablets kicks off with the creation of planet Earth Mu and the superior human civilization that lived within. The people of Mu were called the Nakal, and of course, Churchward had a vivid description of their existence. According to the writer, Mu was a continent that flourished between 50,000 and 12,000 years ago as a real world. In his words, Mu was dominated by a black race and was superior in many respects to our own. As if to further shock his audience, Churchward noted that Mu had over 64 million inhabitants, 7 major cities, and colonies on other continents. He explained how the 64 million people of the lost continent were divided into 10 tribes, but they followed a single government and had a single religion. But let's move forward to the big question. Where was Mu located? In the Pacific Ocean. You heard that right. Churchward revealed that the land of Mu was located in the Pacific Ocean, and it stretched east-west from the Marianas to Easter Island, and north to south from Hawaii to Mangaia. Not only did it spread across such vast land, but it was deduced by historians to be bigger than South America. Mu was that large, a continent. But it also begs the question, what was within this lost continent? Aside from the Nakal inhabitants within, this continent brimmed with natural life. Churchward recalled that the continent was a beautiful one with vast rivers, massive hills, and gorgeous plains. What started as sunburnt tablets with a strange language soon became the reference for an ancient civilization that birthed humans. But as you may already know, the testimony of one man, no matter how sincere, could not stand solely as evidence of a matter so controversial. So the questions kept coming in. If Churchward was right to back Augustus Le Plongeon in his claims of Mu being a mother civilization to humanity, what in the world happened to over 60 million inhabitants of a highly advanced civilization? Where did they all go? Churchward's response was staggering. They disappeared, he said. In his words, 12,000 years ago, Mu was completely obliterated in almost a single night. Wait, what? We were just as shocked. Churchward claimed that Mu faced a sudden series of earthquakes and volcanic eruptions. Amid the disarray, the broken land fell into that great abyss of fire, and so it sank and was covered by over 50 million square miles of water. In one night, the great mother civilization that birthed ancient Egypt and other known civilizations had crumbled. But the more Churchward explained, the more implausible his cause sounded. If he did read about Mu from the tablets handed over by the Indian priest, where did the tablets go? Could they have been hidden away? Or did Churchward invent the whole story? Before you believe the latter, hold on. When everyone least expected it, more testimonies about Mu began to surface. One such remarkable testimonial was from the infamous mineralogist and archaeologist William Niven. Born in 1850, Niven lived to discover hidden minerals and stuck-away tablets. In 1921, Niven discovered the first of over 100 tablets while digging in San Miguel Amantla. On these tablets were texts in languages too complex to understand. But to the shock of many, one man could interpret them: James Churchward. Churchward claimed that the language resembled the one he initially learned from his priest friend in India. This led many to wonder, what if the Niven tablets were also written by descendants of the Mu civilization? Churchward confirmed that the text was similar to the Naga Maya language, but the ancient stones were not the only proof that Churchward had. When it comes to proof of Mu's existence, this is only the tip of the iceberg. Do you know that there are questionable structures underneath the Pacific Ocean? Imagine taking a trip to the Pacific Island and witnessing structures too defined to be attributed to nature. This was Churchward's next proof. The area deduced to be occupied by the Mu civilization had monuments that showed evidence of their existence. It made sense too. If Mu was real and as advanced as Churchward believed, then its people would have left behind traces of their knowledge. And they did leave traces bold enough to let us question all we believed about the true creation of mankind. The first outstanding evidence of the mother civilization is the Moai statues of Easter Island. The Moai are gigantic stone statues of human figures built by the Rapa Nui people of Easter Island. But these are no ordinary statues. One look at them and you could tell that the people who built them did so with meticulous precision and quality materials. Built between 1250 and 1500 AD, these have an absurd figure. Oversized heads that make up 3 times the whole statue, and they have no legs. The tallest of the Moai is called Paro, and it is about 10 meters high and weighs approximately 82 tons. Can you believe that? When the Rapa Nui people were asked about the inspiration for building such monuments, they revealed that the Moai were created to honor their ancestors. But this was such a long time ago. So who were their ancestors, and where did they come from? This leads us right back to Mu. Since the geographical location of Easter Island also correlates with the location defined by Churchward, all hands are pointing to one big question. What if the Rapa Nui people were descendants of the lost continent called Mu? Think about it. How else could a civilization from that time think of building such towering statues without being taught how to do so by an older one? Let's not forget the primary material used to erect these magnificent statues, volcanic tuff. This is a relatively soft, workable rock formed from compressed volcanic ash. It is said that this tuff was brought from an extinct volcanic crater on the island known as Rano Raraku. And on that site the statues were built. However, historians noted a fresh concern. As diligent as the Rapa Nui people were in building such a timeless monument with the resources available then, it was humanly impossible to move the Moai to where their remains currently reside. How did the Nui people do it? The tale from the natives would leave you shocked. The statues walked to their location, they said. When the oldest natives of Easter Island were asked about the mode of transportation of the Moai, this was their response. According to their oral tradition, the Moai did walk. But by now we all know that this is not a feasible explanation. Researchers Terry Hunt and Carl Lipo suggest that the statues were moved upright in a rocking motion using ropes. This is the closest alignment with the accounts of the islanders. Some scholars think otherwise and propose a different thought for transportation. What if the Rapa Nui used a system of logs to roll the statues to their destination? This method would have demanded lots of timber resources, but at least it was logical. The last suspected mode of transportation of these statues is the least believed, but it seems to be the one that Churchward loved the most: spiritual power. Some beliefs say that the Moai contain spiritual forces that equip the statues to move themselves to their respective destinations. Churchward supported this trail of thought as he established from his tablet findings that although he thought mankind came from Mu, the mother civilization was no ordinary civilization. But if they were not ordinary humans like us, who were they? Before we dissect that hot topic, you need to see further proof that will make you give the Mu civilization some extra points on your board. Aside from the legendary Moai of Easter Island, the pyramid phenomenon is a mystery that might hold clues to the mother civilization. How do you explain structures so great being built across different parts of the world in similar patterns? Many say that the pyramids were built by the Egyptians, but is that true? How come pyramids built thousands of years apart by different civilizations all follow the same principles? Take a look at the Great Pyramid of Giza. Located in Egypt, the structure is so meticulously built that scholars say it is aligned with extreme mathematical precision. Now, Look at the pyramids of Teotihuacan in Mexico. They share similar designs despite being built thousands of years later. But this is the least cause for surprise. Have you seen the Shanxi pyramids? China. These are older than the Egyptian pyramids, yet they follow a similar geometric blueprint. This begs the question, were they truly built by different civilizations with no connection to each other? If yes, how would distant civilizations build the same structures, using the same principles, if they were completely isolated? What if the mother civilization, Mu, was the dot that connected them all? Multiple theories are rising to buttress the point. One suggests that the builders of the Mu continent carried this knowledge with them as they spread across the world. As they moved, they preserved their lost civilization's secrets in stone. Stone tablets, like the ones discovered by James Churchward. What if Churchward was not the only one who found those tablets? Although he was audible about his findings, others may not have been. A more interesting theory suggests that these pyramids were not just tombs or temples, but energy hubs built using a form of advanced technology too complex for us to comprehend. Could the pyramids be the last remnant of the lost continent Mu? If true, what advanced technology did this ancient civilization use that could not be understood? Were the Mu people even humans? Brace yourself. You are about to hear some of the most bizarre stories about the Mu continent. It will leave you questioning your genes and wondering if you are 100% human after all. Let's backtrack to who the Mu people were. As popularized by Augustus Le Plongeon and James Churchward, the Mu continent was said to be the first great civilization. That is, all human knowledge, technology, and even spirituality came from here. This would explain the magnificent structures on Easter Island and even the pyramids. But the deeper we dig, the more questions emerge. How did an ancient civilization predating Egypt achieve such incredible advancements? How did they develop complex languages, master astronomy, and build structures that modern engineering still finds difficult to explain? Little wonder the wild theories started flying in. What if Mu's people were not human? Enter the ancient astronaut hypothesis. This theory says that extraterrestrials visited Earth thousands of years ago and interacted with early humans, influencing their development. Newsflash. This theory is no mere speculation. Proof has been found in ancient texts around the world. Take, for instance, how the Sumerians talk about the Anunnaki, celestial beings who descended from heaven to create and guide humanity, or the Mayan Popol Vuh, which elaborates on sky gods who made man from nothing. Or do we talk about the Hindu Vedas and their Vimanas craft piloted by the gods? The stories of contact with extraterrestrial life abound. Some researchers argue that these were not myths, but visitors from outside our planet. If they are correct, could Mu have been their first point of contact? The witnesses of the tablets keep saying one thing: the people of Mu were incredibly advanced. They were said to have divine rulers who were wise beings with knowledge deeper than what a primitive civilization should have possessed. Now it seems like Mu is not just home to humans, but something more. A hybrid civilization, perhaps. But if this was true on any plane, there is a horrific likelihood that awaits any human willing to explore this trail of thought. Some theories suggest that if extraterrestrials did visit Mu, they had one goal in mind: to intervene with humanity. After all, ancient texts keep making references to divine beings being the source of humanity or modifying humanity. This could have occurred through mating between extraterrestrials and the first civilizations. In this era, scientists could call such matters a total abomination because of their controversy. What if this coexistence was also an outrageous controversy back then? So much that the entire continent had to be wiped away in a single night. This is where the real chaos began. It did not start with the fascinating origin of the Mu civilization or James Churchward, the first audible founder of the ancient tablets. Neither did historians make a scuffle when the Moai statues and the Great Pyramids were linked to Mu, or more shockingly, when there were theories of a possible mating between humans and aliens thousands of years ago. The straw that broke the camel's back was the sudden disappearance of Mu and its inhabitants. All other theories and propositions were tolerated as historians could not find solid proof to debunk the claims of James Churchward. However, geological findings were the core strength of historians. If there were no intellectual proof of such a civilization, surely the Earth would not lie, would it? Sadly, there is no geological evidence of a sunken continent in the Pacific, and this is how scientists concluded. Geologists argue that continents don't just sink, not especially one with over 60 million inhabitants and a thriving livelihood within. Moreover, the Pacific ocean floor has been extensively mapped. There is no evidence of a massive lost landmass beneath the waves. Even plate tectonics, which is the process by which the Earth's crust shifts, makes it impossible for a continent as large as the size of Mu to have suddenly disappeared without a trace. Then there are the Nakal tablets discovered by James Churchward. The ancient records that he claimed told the story of Mu. The problem is that no one ever saw these tablets besides Churchward. He never provided the tablets for secondary analysis. Because of this, no other researcher could confirm their existence. Without the tablets, the entire story of the Mu civilization is built on an unverified claim. But it doesn't end here. Linguists also came forward to challenge Churchward's belief that Mu was the mother civilization that influenced Egypt, Mesopotamia, and Mesoamerica. Their thoughts: what if the languages and architectural principles of these different civilizations were all developed independently? Since there is no solid linguistic or genetic evidence linking them to a shared origin in the Pacific, this looks like a sure thought. But if Mu never existed, why do so many cultures have stories of a lost homeland swallowed by the sea? Is there a loose thread in this story? Perhaps there is. Although scientists and historians dismiss Churchward's claims of Mu being a lost continent that founded human civilization, some researchers believe that there could be an iota of truth behind the legend. One possibility. What if Mu was not a continent, but a misinterpretation of real historical events? Take, for example, the Indonesian landmass theory. Researchers suggest that Mu could be the Sundaland region, a vast area of Southeast Asia that partially went under at the end of the last ice age. This was about 12,000 years ago, at about the same time frame Churchward described. Another misinterpretation deduced by scholars is the writings that started it all. Remember the Mayan writings discovered by Augustus Le Plongeon? Yes. Some researchers believe that Le Plongeon simply misinterpreted Mayan texts that referenced an ancient place called Mu. What if those texts were not referring to a lost continent, but a different symbolic land? And about the extinction of Mu. Churchward said the lost continent disappeared in a cataclysmic event. Volcanic eruptions and earthquakes, he said. But what if this legend is a memory of real events? Disastrous events like the sinking of Doggerland in Europe or the flooding of Sunderland. These alternative explanations suggest that Mu might not have been a lost continent, but a mix of different real-world events and myths passed down from generation to generation. Once upon a time, scholars sat to learn at the feet of high-thinking philosophers. From the era of Socrates, the world was beginning to understand the significance of philosophy and how it impacts life. So when Plato, Socrates' student, came along, the respect was passed down. This student had depth to his words. No doubt, Plato lived up to the task in his teachings. But one day, everything changed. The cause? He published 2 dialogues titled Timaeus and Critias. But what was it about these dialogues? It was not just because of their interesting names, no. In the dialogues, Plato expressed his thoughts on how the world came to be. However, he did not do it ordinarily. He dived deeply into creation, as though he were narrating from a solid historical record. And in between the lines, he mentioned an ancient civilization, Atlantis. What exactly did Plato say about Atlantis? In his words, "In the days of old, the gods had the whole earth distributed among them by allotment. But Poseidon, receiving for his lot the island of Atlantis, begat children by a mortal woman, and settled them in a part of the island which I will describe. And when he finally described the land, the history world was thrown into chaos. Here is why. Plato described a civilization too advanced for humans to comprehend. In no time, his words resembled the script of a science fiction movie. Take a look. Plato wrote, "The most famous of them all was the overthrow of the island of Atlantis. This great island lay over against the pillars of Heracles, in extent greater than Libya and Asia put together, and was the passage to other islands and to a great ocean of which the Mediterranean Sea was only the harbor. And within the pillars, the empire of Atlantis reached in Europe to Tyrrhenia and in Libya to Egypt." He didn't stop there. In further texts, Plato revealed that the knowledge of Atlantis was passed down to him from Egyptian ancestors 9,000 years ago. The Greek philosopher outlined that Atlantis was so advanced that it rivaled human civilization, and this was just too much to take in. Before long, there was a problem. Imagine respecting an authority so much that their words are gold, but at some point they say something that doesn't sit right. That was how scholars felt about the Atlantean civilization. This is why. On the one hand, Plato narrated the existence of Atlantis like a real historical record. He cited that the knowledge was handed down from ancient Egyptian priests to the Greek statesman Solon, who lived around 600 BCE. On the other hand, it looked like a tale. Since Plato was such a philosopher, scholars argued that his depiction of Atlantis was only a metaphor and not a real place. But was this argument right? A solid question was raised by counter-arguing historians. If the Atlantis described in Timaeus and Critias was a mere allegory, why did Plato's description use real places like Asia, Europe, and Libya to emphasize its size and location? This great island lay over against the pillars of Heracles, in extent greater than Libya and Asia put together. Also, this great Atlantis had a mystical end to it. Scholars began to argue that this civilization may be more than the fable that many think it to be. What if it did exist and met a catastrophic end? We are not talking about the mythical kingdom of cartoons or sci-fi, but the real Atlantis was described by Plato as a high-tech utopian civilization that vanished beneath the ocean in a single day and night. According to mainstream history, it never existed, just an allegory. But according to Plato, we see something different when he writes about the civilization's demise. But afterwards there occurred violent earthquakes and floods, and in a single day and night of misfortune, all your warlike men in a body sank into the earth, and the island of Atlantis in like manner disappeared in the depths of the sea. There was Atlantis, and then there wasn't. How can such a detailed account be swept under the carpet as a mere myth? The answer is that it can't, because deep in the sands of time, beneath ancient ruins and in the DNA of mysterious megaliths, clues are emerging. Clues that suggest Atlantis may have been a real place. Not just that, but proof that its people weren't amateur primitive survivors, but something far more advanced. Now, we're not just asking, did Atlantis exist? We're asking something more daring. What would it feel like to live there? Imagine you were one of them, an Atlantean citizen in the final days before the flood destroyed the city. How would it be? According to Plato, there is quite a list of activities. You'd walk under domed temples pulsing with crystal-powered energy, float through aerial transport systems far beyond our current technology, eat foods enhanced by frequency-based agriculture, heal diseases using sound and color, and what's more, you could even study the cosmos through lenses far older than Galileo's. Sounds like science fiction, right? But it's not. These ideas come from ancient texts and archaeological discoveries that historians are still trying to explain or cover up. But then, something happened to disrupt this high-end technology of Atlantis. Something so catastrophic, it didn't just destroy cities. It erased an entire timeline. But before we talk about the end, let's take a trip into the forgotten world of Atlantis. It's morning, and the sun reflects on your face. But wait. As you sit up to take in the view by your window, you realize the land looks different. The sun rises over concentric rings of land and sea. One turn to your left, and you see towering white walls shimmer in the light, and crystal domes hum with subtle energy. Welcome to Atlantis, a place where life is super advanced. You step out of your home and the sight leaves you dumbfounded. Your house looks like a structure carved from luminous stone. It's not just hands down gorgeous, it also self-regulates temperature and channels ambient frequency. How crazy is that? You look at the roads. There are no traffic jams like the rush hour in New York City. There are no frantic car horns or buzzing phones. All you see are magnetic transport pods gliding silently along invisible rails. You notice one thing. Time here flows with rhythm, not chaos. The city itself is alive, yet peaceful at the same time. Take a look at the architecture, and you'll spot something. That the citizens of Atlantis have style. The Atlanteans designed their urban spaces with sacred geometry in mind, streets aligning with star constellations and buildings vibrating at healing frequencies. In this land, everything is both functional and spiritual. In Atlantis, science and soul are one. Now, when you move to a new city or travel for the holidays, your residence is your priority, right? But once you admire your surroundings, there is a long list of experiences you'd want to have. It's the same with our little trip. Our next stop is somewhere more fascinating. You make your way to the energy hall. Like its name implies, this is the spot that transmits all the energy in the city. With such an advanced description given by Plato, you're not surprised to see the walls pounding with a violet glow. Here, massive quartz crystals channel Earth's electromagnetic currents, powering the entire city with such accuracy. But these crystals don't just power lamps, they also recalibrate your consciousness. Sounds crazy? Wait for it. In modern science, there is confirmation that quartz has high electrical properties. But it didn't start today. Ancient texts hint at similar crystal networks in Egypt, Tibet, and even Mesoamerica. In addition, Atlantean healers use these stones not as instruments. One step into their healing chamber, and harmonic tones flood your senses. Unlike our world today, there are no pills or washed-down orthodox medicine. How healthy would that be? If you consider their medicine superb, pause for a minute and think about what their educational system would have been like. Now we know this much. That education isn't about testing memory, it's about awakening potential. With the level of development in Atlantis, the school children would have been taught telepathy, sacred geometry, astronomy, and dream travel. Or not. Would you consider this to be a far reach? For an island so progressive, schools double as temples, and spiritual alignment is prioritized over rote facts. Isn't this a feature that our educational system today desperately needs? Yes, but even the beautiful educational curriculum is not the only thing we might have to copy from the Atlantean civilization. Like Plato wrote, "Now in this island of Atlantis there existed a confederation of kings, of great and marvelous power, which held sway over all the island, and over many other islands also, and parts of the continent." How powerful was this civilization for it to rule over other parts of the continent? Let's deduce that from its high-end tech. In the heart of Atlantis, energy wasn't just harnessed, it was harmonized. At the city's core, massive crystalline towers stood tall like sentinels. The goal? For beauty and balance. These structures formed a vast energy grid that tapped into the Earth's natural magnetic field. To put this into perspective, think Tesla towers, but many millennia earlier. That's not all. Atlanteans believed crystals held consciousness. When properly aligned, they became pipes for anti-gravity travel, the manipulation of matter, and even time distortion. At this rate, it's clear that the features that are called fake could just be suppressed history. Even today, fragments of quartz-based tech and magnetic stone alignments in sites like Pumapunku and Baalbek continue to baffle engineers. What if these are the leftovers of Atlantean exports? But for a moment in your trip, you shift the focus from all you can see to what you hear. And that's when you realize, in Atlantis, sound was not just for music, it was the language of matter. Atlantean scientists didn't build with hammers and chisels, they built with frequency. There is only one way they could have achieved that. By directing harmonic sound waves at materials, they altered density, reshaped stone, and even levitated structures. Some accounts even describe tuning forks that could lift objects. Others tell of voice-activated doors and sonic surgeries that healed tissue without a surgical blade. Strange, right? This begs the big question. What if the Great Pyramids, the stone spheres of Costa Rica, and the H blocks of Tiwanaku were constructed using this same lost sound tech? In the 20th century, Nikola Tesla dazzled everyone with the Wardenclyffe Tower. What they didn't know is that Atlantis was already centuries ahead, powering entire cities without wires, using piezoelectric crystals, magnetic fields, and atmospheric resonance. Atlanteans transmitted energy in an invisible manner. Light glowed without bulbs. Water flowed uphill. Vehicles glided silently. The real kicker? They did this without polluting a single atom of air. This is the height that environmentalists today keep striving to achieve. But the thing is, an advanced civilization already did them millennia ago. And if by chance you get sick during your visit to Atlantis, brace yourself. They've got some healing tactics up their sleeves. In Atlantis, medicine wasn't just about curing illness, it was about restoring harmony. The Atlanteans believed disease began as a disruption in the body's frequency, so instead of pills or incisions, healers used vibration. Light, sound, and color weren't mere aesthetics like in today's world. Back then, they were medicine. Patients lay beneath domes shaped like prisms, where beams of colored light pulsed in specific frequencies to realign chakras, mend tissues, and calm the nervous system. Today, fringe sciences like chromotherapy and bioresonance echo these ideas. But in Atlantis, they were standard practice. Can you believe that? You don't walk into a hospital in Atlantis. You enter a temple. Walls are carved with sacred geometry. Incense wafts through crystalline air. And silence over there isn't awkward, it's medicinal. Even the method of diagnosis was different. Aura readers and telepathic scans replaced MRIs. Illnesses were viewed not as invasions, but as spiritual imbalances seeking attention. Little wonder when modern archaeologists find ancient temple ruins with surgical precision. cut into stone tables and odd metallic instruments nearby. They wonder, were these early hospitals? But as unique as the hearing system was in Atlantis, nothing prepares you for their aging techniques. In Atlantis, aging wasn't feared. It was optional. Some citizens regularly entered rejuvenation chambers. These are crystalline pods that emit low-frequency waves to repair DNA, regenerate tissue, and even awaken ancestral memory. The thought of it alone is mind-boggling. You want to know what they say? It said these chambers could extend life by centuries. Atlanteans believed DNA carried the echoes of past lives. Healing the body also unlocked forgotten knowledge. Modern science calls this epigenetics. Atlantis called it remembering. But here's the question. If such tech existed, what happened to it? The answer? We'll never know. But as you walk down the streets of Atlantis, you strike up a convo with some Atlanteans, and you notice something. In Atlantis, leadership wasn't inherited. It was earned. Kings and queens weren't just figureheads of royal blood, but initiates who had passed tests of mental discipline and spiritual maturity. Merit guided monarchy, and the throne was shared with councils of sages, healers, and scientists. What's more, they are app-selected by intellect, intuition, and integrity. Behind the rulers, there is something too unreal to utter. A priesthood unlike any other. Let's talk about the Atlantean priests for a minute. These priests were energy masters trained in astral projection, alchemy, and universal law right from childhood. Their temples kept beating with spiritual knowledge. And their government? It was far from what we know today. In those times, governance embraced duality. Every council balanced masculine logic with feminine wisdom. Children were taught not just facts, but also a strict focus. In this world, psychic ability wasn't supernatural. It was the standard. Isn't this the best kind of governance? By now, you've fed your eyes with the wonders of Atlantis. The next thing is to fall into the routine of being an Atlantean. What does daily life in Atlantis look like? First, you wake up not to a buzzing alarm, but to light filtered gently through translucent crystal walls. Like most homes in Atlantis, yours is made of a shimmering alloy called orichalcum. This is a legendary metal said to gleam like fire and conduct energy like no other. Over there, windows aren't just for sunlight. They're made of crystal glass that amplifies positive frequencies and shields against energetic pollution. Thinking about it alone makes you want to do a world revamp, right? And when you talk about transportation, the traditional asphalt and engines become useless. In Atlantis, travel is seamless, silent, and almost magical. Yes, levitating pods glide along unseen tracks, guided by resonance rather than roads. Most likely these crafts are powered by crystal-based energy systems adjusted to the Earth's natural magnetic field. Ever need to cross the ocean? Just enter an underwater transit tunnel, and you'd be at your destination in no time. This was the level of advanced technology Plato was trying to portray in his dialogues. And if you are to talk about how work, play, and divinity were segmented, think again. Daily life in Atlantis wasn't divided between career and self-care. Instead, your occupation reflected your soul's frequency. Artists, healers, architects, and scientists were all the same. Work wasn't seen as labor, but a sacred contribution to the community. Play meant immersive learning. Music, dance, and meditation were core rituals, not side hobbies. On the other hand, spiritual practice wasn't optional. It was embedded in daily routines. Imagine crystal calibration in the morning, then collective resonance baths at dusk. Every action was a conscious ritual, even eating. This wasn't utopia. It was designed. When you think about it, could it be that the lost key to human potential was hidden in how we lived? Did you know that long before Magellan set sail or Columbus touched the Americas, Atlantean navigators were already crisscrossing the globe? Here is how they did it. They didn't use paper maps or compasses. Instead, they read the stars like a language. Like Plato narrated, Atlantean ships, which were powered by magnetic propulsion, were built to harness Earth's energy grid. These days, some scholars point to the Piri Reis map, which is a 16th century enigma showing Antarctica ice-free as a remnant of Atlantean knowledge. This leads us to ask, who mapped a continent buried under miles of ice centuries before we discovered it? Was this global awareness just a legend? Or did Atlantis really touch all corners of the Earth? And when we talk about the artifacts all over the world, the tension in the room increases. How do African-style statues end up in ancient Olmec sites in Mexico? Why do pre-Columbian ruins in Peru resemble temple designs from Egypt? Mainstream archaeology calls it a coincidence, but Atlantean theorists beg to differ. They say it was through contact. But wait, contact with what? Let's take a look. Trinkets, carvings, and pyramidal blueprints stretch across continents like breadcrumb trails. In Bolivia's Puma Punku, precision-cut stones fit together like 3D puzzle pieces so much that some claim the techniques match those in Giza. Over in Japan's Yonaguni Monument, an underwater city lies suspiciously aligned with the Atlantean description. Were these cultural overlaps just spontaneous genius, or are they proof of a lost trade network led by one global empire? According to Plato, Egyptian priests claimed Atlantis fell 9,000 years before Solon's time. But what if that wasn't the end, but only the beginning of a diaspora? Legends say that some Atlanteans fled the cataclysm and seeded civilization elsewhere. Egypt's Thoth, Quetzalcoatl in Mesoamerica, Viracocha in Peru, bearded, light-skinned gods who taught writing, astronomy, and ethics. Could this be a pure coincidence? Even the Dogon people of Mali speak of sky visitors with cosmic knowledge. This is eerily similar to the Atlantean mythos. This led to the theory that when Atlantis fell, maybe it didn't disappear as Plato said. What if it simply spread? And if there is one thing to note about Atlanteans, it's that they didn't fear death. They viewed it as a transition in an eternal journey. Reincarnation wasn't a theory, it was known. Memories of past lives were sometimes accessible, especially to priests and sages who mastered soul sciences. They believed in karmic cycles too. These are actions echoed through lifetimes until harmony is restored. In those days, prophets warned of a coming imbalance, where greed would overpower wisdom and the island's fall would become inevitable. But how was this even possible? We are talking about an advanced civilization that had things figured out. What could go wrong? But as magnificent as Atlantis was, a time came when its people began to forget its purpose. Although the Atlanteans were advanced in thinking, there is hardly any advancement that can stop a greedy soul. In the story told by Plato, the immense greed and moral decline of the people were too much for the gods to bear. To this effect, their wrath came upon the land in a massive earthquake, and in a single night, Atlantis vanished. But in this story, something doesn't add up. If indeed it was the earthquake that wiped out the Atlantean civilization, why did this catastrophe happen at around the same time as the Great Flood? At first, the flood was just a Bible story, something read out of an ancient book to its believers. It read that there was a righteous man, a massive boat, and an entire planet swallowed by water. The Almighty sent this flood to flush out wickedness from the surface of the earth. It was too much, and there had to be an end. But what if there is more to this story? The Great Flood wasn't just a warning to the righteous. It was a record penned down through different cultures. But there is a scarier thought. The Great Flood did not just wipe out wickedness from Mother Earth. It erased an entire ancient civilization. What's more, this civilization may have possessed more knowledge, technology, and cities that surpassed the advancement in our world today. And for an icing on the cake, they left footprints that even the floodwaters could not wash away. Brace yourself as we uncover the evidence of the forgotten world that existed before the rain. But before we pick apart the traces of an intelligent civilization before the flood, let's talk about the flood itself. Do you think it really happened? You've heard the Bible tales. A man named Noah was singled out to preach to the sinners at the time about the impending disaster. His message was simple: repent and join the ark before the flood hits. But the herd of people did not listen to a word he said. And then it came. The flood waters. Gushing from the heavens for days on end, it poured endlessly. For 40 days and 40 nights, the rain poured down on all who refused to get in the ark with Noah and his family. And for 150 days after the rain, the waters stayed on the earth before disappearing altogether. Then the new world began with Noah, his family, and every living species inside the ark. But unfortunately, this is where historians found a problem. It was a big problem. To them, the Noachian flood story did not add up. Questions kept rising to the surface concerning Noah's warning about the imminent catastrophe. How did he travel the entire world to warn people about the flood? In addition, how come not even one person budged? It made no sense. This led researchers to hint at an eerie conclusion. What if the flood never happened? Crazy, right? But before you let that thought sink in, there is something you should know. The Great Flood is not limited to a biblical tale. This is where it gets weird. You would expect one or two ancient cultures to have flood myths. That could make sense. After all, rivers do overflow, and storms visit us once in a while. But the tables are turned when a story that sounds like a folktale is spread across too many cultures. It begins to hold water. The same goes for the flood story. Since over 200 cultures across the planet all tell nearly identical flood stories, it is no longer a coincidence, it becomes a pattern. Take, for instance, the Mesopotamians. They had Utnapishtim, who was warned by the gods of an upcoming deluge. As a result, he built a giant boat that carried his family, craftsmen, and the seed of all living things. Or do we refer to the Hindus? They had Manu, who was saved by a fish god and carried aboard a ship to repopulate the earth. The list is endless. The Maya, the Greeks, the Norse, the Chinese, and even the Australians, you name it. They all have the story of a flood that came to cleanse the world after an age of corruption and forgotten power. Same plot, different names, and different timelines. If one myth is rooted in so many cultures, then truth lies within. Think about how specific the details are across different versions. 1. There is a warning from a god or celestial being. 2. There is a chosen survivor or family. 3. You see the building of a great vessel or ark. 4. Animals and knowledge are upheld and rescued for continuity's sake. And lastly, there is a new beginning afterward, a changed world from what existed before the flood. Even in cultures that had no contact or shared language, the same elements showed up time and again. Because of this, researchers James Fraser and Mircea Eliade argued that the flood myths are not just myths. Behind the folklore, there had to be something more. It has been established the flood was no scam, so what if they were not all making it up? That would mean one thing: the flood stories are eyewitness accounts handed down over millennia. And although many like to go with the Noachian version, where a new world began from only Noah and his offspring, it doesn't tick all the boxes. From here, the thought begins to rise. What if there was an ancient civilization that was wiped away by the flood? Furthermore, what if some survived to share the story of their former existence? Realistically, what if they left geological evidence too firm to ignore? The flood myth is no myth. Instead, it is a memory whose story has been told from culture to culture. In the same vein, the Earth has its own way of preserving memories, like the Great Deluge. If an advanced ancient civilization was indeed wiped away by the floodwaters, trust the Earth to keep the records. Whether through rocks, soil, or ancient seabeds, the planet keeps geological entries. If the Earth is so good at preserving geological evidence, why won't it keep some from a massive hydrological event like the Great Flood, an event so widespread that it reshaped continents for millennia to come? Surely something is lurking for us to see. But the question is, what are they? In the state of Washington, there is a place that looks like the aftermath of a planetary war. One look and you would see rivers that don't flow, valleys too deep for their streams, and ripples the size of high buildings, all etched into solid rocks. This place is called the Channeled Scablands. For decades, geologists racked their brains over one question: how did this bizarre terrain come to be? This query bugged minds for years, not until a man, J. Halen Bretz, proposed something radical. In the 1920s, Bretz suggested that the Scablands were carved by a massive flood. And Bretz did not suggest a random deluge, no. He proposed that the flood was so violent, it would have drowned entire regions in mere days. At the time, he was laughed at. It took 50 years, satellite imagery, and overwhelming evidence to prove he was right. But here's the question no one's asking. Were the Scablands carved by the same great flood we all know? More interestingly, what else did the flood destroy? Think about it. This wasn't slow erosion. This was a cataclysm. Imagine water moving at over 60 miles per hour, walls of it hundreds of feet high, capable of erasing entire cities and whatever secrets they held. Mainstream science calls it the Missoula floods, the result of glacial dam bursts during the last ice age. This happened around 14,000 years ago. But researchers like Graham Hancock and Randall Carlson argue something deeper. They suggest that this event wasn't just natural, it was a global reset. If the Scablands are proof of sudden world-changing floods, what else is out there? Some historians believe this was just one piece of a domino effect, that similar megafloods carved the Black Sea Basin, submerged the Gulf of Cambay, and buried Atlantis-like cities beneath the ocean. And maybe, just maybe, the real reason the Scablands were ignored for decades wasn't geological pride. It was because the evidence pointed to a version of human history too dangerous to accept. The idea that we weren't the first advanced civilization. But firstly, what is the evidence that there was one before us? After the floodwaters receded, something strange happened. Humanity forgot, and a new world began. But some things are not so easily erased. Scattered across the globe are structures that defy conventional timelines. Megalithic monuments so advanced, they don't fit the civilizations they're credited to, and in some cases, they seem older than history itself. Let's take, for instance, Göbekli Tepe in Turkey, carbon dated to around 11,600 years ago. That's 7,000 years before the Egyptian pyramids. But despite the massive time difference, it features precision-carved stone pillars weighing up to 20 tons, arranged in complex symbolic circles. This was no primitive farming community. It was a society of engineers, astronomers, and architects. Then there's Pumapunku in Bolivia. Massive stone blocks cut with machine-like accuracy, interlocking like Lego, but built by people who, according to mainstream history, didn't even have the wheel. And the mystery? Many of these sites show signs of sudden abandonment or catastrophic damage, and the prime suspect is the Great Flood. When you take a closer look, these anomalies are not isolated. Across South America, Egypt, and Southeast Asia, temples, pyramids, and fortresses lie partially buried under the earth. Not only are they buried under sedimented rock, but their lower layers are built with larger, tighter, and more advanced stonework. This does not match the techniques of the cultures that later repurposed them. In Egypt, the massive blocks of the Osirion look nothing like the more refined, newer dynastic structures. The same goes with the Temple of Jupiter in Baalbek, where trilithon stones weighing over 800 tons sit beneath Roman additions. Did these sites begin with an older, more advanced culture, one wiped out by flood or disaster? Archaeologists try to explain this away as a mere coincidence or clever engineering with primitive tools. But when the oldest ruins are the most advanced and they align with flood damage patterns, it raises questions. Could these be the ruins of a pre-flood civilization? One with technology we don't fully understand? A society with knowledge of astronomy, sound resonance, and megalithic transport? And if they weren't just building temples but infrastructure, what kind of world did the flood really destroy? This is where it gets interesting. In a bid to answer the question, theorists have cooked up endless possibilities of the ancient civilization that could have existed before the flood. First on the list is the Mu, the mother civilization thought to have existed before humans. To date, scientists and theorists wonder what ended the reign of such an advanced civilization. While some blamed it on a sudden disappearance, it still doesn't add up. How can a developed community be obliterated in one night without a trace? But the big question is, what if they were destroyed by the flood? In the 19th century, a strange idea fanned the papers. Of all the theories cooked up by researchers, this one hit the spot the most. And it all started with an archaeologist named Augustus Le Plongeon. This was a researcher who spent a bulk of his career studying Mayan ruins and establishing arguments about the ancient Yucatan and Egyptian civilizations. But after a while, Le Plongeon decided to play it big. He declared that there was a mother civilization, one that preceded even the Mayan civilization. But was there any proof of his claim? The answer is no. But the lack of proof was only for a short while. A British writer by the name James Churchward soon came along with solid evidence. During his time serving as a soldier in India, Churchward encountered a top-tier priest who showed him the unspeakable, tablets that were written by the Mu civilization themselves. Can you believe that? The information on these tablets cemented the idea that Mu was no fairy tale, but a vast continent that housed technology beyond that of humans. But beyond the description passed on by James Churchward, historians asked for more evidence. It made no sense to bank on a single testimony from a priest and an archaeologist. In response, other researchers began to connect the dots, and when they finally did, the results left them speechless. Enter the Moai statues of Easter Island. These are gigantic stone statues of human figures erected by the Rapa Nui people of Easter Island. But when you observe these statues, you realize one thing. They are not ordinary. They were built with such advanced techniques that still make modern engineers marvel at the precision. And to think that these were built millions of years ago. This brings up the floating question. What if the statues are a remainder from the aftermath of the drastic flood? To further cement this scary thought, the Rapa Nui people were interviewed regarding the excellence of the Moai statues. When they were asked about the origin of such superior engineering knowledge, they revealed that the Moai were built to honor their ancestors. In the words of the locals, the knowledge was passed on to them. But who are these ancestors? How was such knowledge passed through such wide time gaps? Did the flood truly wipe away everyone aside from Noah and his descendants? With further research, scientists began to debunk Churchward's evidence and his claims of the Mu civilization. Many cited the fact that an entire advanced civilization cannot be destroyed out of the blue. There should be substantial remains, both visibly and on Earth's surface. When they could not find substantial geological evidence of such an existence, the theory began to sink underground. However, we must remember, when there is smoke, a fire is burning somewhere. If the fire is not the Mu civilization, it could be something else. Even worse, what if the ancient civilization wiped out by the flood was not human-like at all? You know, when the topic of an ancient civilization comes up, many like to think up great pictures. Perhaps they were like humans, but in a different way. But is that really the case? What if the ancient civilization wiped out by the flood were entirely different from humans in every way? What if they were animals? Enter the dinosaurs, but not as you know them. For over a century, dinosaurs have been branded as huge, instinct-driven beasts. Massive, yes, but not intelligent. Just evolutionary dead ends. But what if we've had it all wrong? In 2021, paleontologist Diego Pol led a study on the Maiasaura, a herbivorous dinosaur long dismissed as ordinary. What he found changed everything. These dinosaurs didn't just roam. They returned to the same nesting grounds annually. This instinctive behavior suggested memory, environmental awareness, and even strategic thinking. What's more, they lived in cooperative societies. The males guarded nests while the young foraged for food. They planned, they organized. It was obvious that these species weren't just surviving, they were thriving. And they weren't the only ones. Among the fossil record, another species stands out like a glitch in the simulation, the Troodon. They are small, fast, bird-like, and disturbingly clever. It had a brain-to-body ratio comparable to mammals, binocular vision, and grasping hands, traits that point to cooperative hunting, tool use, and problem-solving. Little wonder that paleontologist Dale Russell and other researchers began to propose a shocking idea. If not for the cataclysm that occurred millions of years ago, Troodon may have evolved into a humanoid, that is, a being capable of complex speech, culture, and technology. Sounds crazy, right? Maybe. But consider this. What really wiped them out? Mainstream science blames an asteroid for the extinction of dinosaurs. But what if the final blow wasn't from above, but from below? For a long time, massive floods have been triggered by melting glaciers, shifting tectonics, or even celestial interference, like in the biblical story. And each version of the flood story has rewritten Earth's surface multiple times. Could one such flood, like the ones described in ancient myths, have erased not just any random species, but the dinosaur civilization? If intelligent dinosaurs once walked the Earth, what if their cities are buried deep beneath rock, sea, and time? Even worse, what if the floodwaters wiped them away? One thing is true, when cities sink, they take their secrets with them. But thanks to modern sonar scans and underwater archaeology, those secrets are starting to surface. In the Gulf of Cambay, off the coast of India, marine researchers discovered what appeared to be massive geometric structures, streets, foundations, and grid-like patterns, you name it. And these were found more than 100 feet beneath the water. Some estimates place them at 9,000 years old, centuries before the Indus Valley civilization even existed. On the other hand, there's Yonaguni, a massive rock off the coast of Japan. Beneath the waves lies a staircase-like formation, terraces, pillars, and flat surfaces cut at near-perfect right angles. Mainstream archaeologists call it natural. But divers, researchers, and even geologists like Dr. Masaki Kimura insist the lines are too precise to be accidental. And in Dwarka, India's legendary sunken city, archaeologists found walls and artifacts where mythology said Krishna once ruled, before the sea swallowed his kingdom. Think about it. Are these just freak geological events? Or are they submerged memories? It gets even more interesting. Most of these sites lie under thick layers of silt and debris. This means that they weren't just covered by rising tides. Rather, They were hit suddenly. If these cities were coastal, they may have fallen victim to glacial meltwater surges or even ancient tsunamis. These are known events capable of raising sea levels dramatically in a matter of days. According to the Younger Dryas impact hypothesis, a comet fragment could have triggered sudden climate change around 12,800 years ago, melting ice sheets and flooding coastlines worldwide. So the flood is no longer a myth or some slow erosion. It's a planet-wide wipeout. What else is still out there, hidden in the deep? If the former pieces of evidence shook you, brace yourself for more. In recent times, satellite imaging has picked up strange formations off the coasts of Cuba, Bimini, and Egypt. Bear in mind that these are places legends already linked to lost cities like Atlantis or Heraclean. Most of them remain either unexplored, dismissed, or classified. But if the ruins under our oceans match the ruins on land, and if their age defies the accepted timeline, then we're not just talking about local disasters. We're talking about the destruction of an entire global network. Yes, these could be footprints of the Great Flood. But there is a slight problem. In the search for evidence of the destruction of advanced civilization, most researchers focus on more tangible proof, things they can see and feel. Since the human brain is wired to believe things that are more physically tangible, this has been the focus. However, there remains an untapped niche that could expose everything about the pre-flood civilization, their knowledge. It's one thing to find ruins. It's another to discover that the people who built them may have known more than we do. Ancient texts, forbidden tablets, and unexplained artifacts suggest that pre-flood civilizations weren't just piling stones. They were busy inventing so much more. For example, let's take the Sumerians, who were credited as the first civilization. Yet their earliest writings already include complex astronomical knowledge, advanced mathematics, and references to planets that we humans discovered millennia later. How did their first step look like our 50th? In Egypt, the Dendera lights carved into temple walls resemble vacuum tubes or arc lamps. At Tiahuanaco, Bolivia, the gate of the sun is covered in what some say is a solar calendar more accurate than ours, and the mysterious Antikythera mechanism found in a Greek shipwreck is a mechanical computer dated over 2,000 years ago. However, researchers believe it was based on much older designs, perhaps salvaged knowledge from a forgotten age. Knowledge came from nothing. How was it possible? And if it came from something older, what was that something? What if post-flood civilizations weren't inventing new knowledge, but recovering pieces of a lost system? Many ancient cultures speak of being taught by sky beings, sages or survivors from an earlier world. Survivors who remembered just enough to restart the cycle. If that's true, then the Great Flood didn't just destroy ancient cities. It destroyed entire paradigms of science, energy, and understanding. What's crazier? Survivors of ancient civilizations, Lemurians, Atlanteans, vanished from the surface but continued to exist deep beneath our feet in a hidden world known as Agartha. Agartha is believed to be a large hidden kingdom inside the earth, not in the hot, liquid core that science talks about. In most versions of the story, Agartha is a very advanced and peaceful civilization. It is completely separate from the people who live on the surface. It has crystal cities, glowing energy, and people who live in peace with nature and spiritual forces. For those who believe in it, even as a symbol or idea, Agartha is more than just a hidden world underground. It's a place untouched by war, greed, or ego. In this society, knowledge guides life. The idea of Agartha in the West started with a French writer named Alexandre Saint-Yves d'Alvedre. He lived in the late 1800s. and was very interested in secret knowledge, politics, and spiritual ideas. Also, he thought there was a deeper meaning behind how the world works. And in 1886, he wrote a book called Mission of India in Europe. In that book, he introduced the idea of Agartha to the Western world. Saint-Yves said Agartha was a real place deep underground. A long time ago, wise and ancient people went there to hide. This happened during a dark period in history, which in Hindu tradition is called the Kali Yuga. According to him, Agartha wasn't destroyed. It just stayed hidden, waiting for the right time to come back. He said Agartha was a huge city with millions of people. It was ruled by a leader who had both spiritual wisdom and total power. The whole society followed a system called synarchy. That means everything, religion, science, and politics, worked together in harmony. For Saint-Yves, this was better than the chaos he saw in modern governments. What made Saint-Yves' claim even more unusual was how he said he learned about Agartha. He claimed that he studied with a mysterious man named Haji Sharif. Saint-Yves described him as a high-ranking spiritual teacher from the East. He also said that through Haji Sharif and through what he called journeys via astral projection, he was able to directly access the hidden kingdom. He wrote about it with confidence and detail, as if he had truly been there. And maybe he was. At first, this book was not meant to be shared with the public. Saint-Yves supposedly destroyed all copies except for a few. Some believe he did this because he feared he had revealed too much, but one of those copies survived. In 1910, after his death, the book was published by Gerard Oncos, who was better known in occult circles as Papus. From that point on, the myth of Agartha began to grow. However, Saint-Yves was not the first person to write about a hidden world beneath the earth. Before him, the French colonial official Louis Jacoliot had written about a mysterious kingdom called Asgartha. He said he found it in ancient Indian manuscripts. But that's not all. The story of Agartha doesn't begin and end with a single book, or even a single culture. It's part of a pattern that seems to echo across centuries and continents. Long before Agartha had a name in the West, ancient civilizations were already speaking about hidden realms beneath the earth. They were describing them in ways strikingly similar to one another, even though these cultures supposedly had no contact. Let's start in the East. In Buddhist and Hindu cosmology, there is a sacred mountain called Mount Meru. It is also known as Sumeru or Mahameru. This mountain is said to stand at the center of all things. Ancient texts describe it as a giant pillar of reality. If you approach from the east, you'll see peaks of crystal. From the south, the peaks appear as lapis lazuli. From the west, they shine like rubies. And from the north, they gleam with gold. It's so large that the sun and moon are said to move around it. But what lies below Meru is just as fascinating. Old Indian texts speak of a place called Patala. Patala is a world below the earth made up of several realms. These are not places of punishment like the Western idea of hell. Patala is described as beautiful and full of life. Ancient Indians wrote about its forests, palaces, and glowing jewels. The beings who live there include serpent-like Nagas, as well as Danavas and Rakshasas. They are said to be highly advanced in both technology and spiritual power. Some stories say these beings are wise and full of knowledge. Others say they can be hostile to humans. Later Buddhist teachings also talk about these underground worlds. The Nagas become linked to hidden water palaces and secret caves beneath Asia, especially in Tibet and the Himalayas. Monks from the region tell stories about tunnels, shrines, and underground cities under their monasteries. They say only those with special training can reach them. In Tibet, there is a story about Shambhala, another hidden kingdom. People often mix it up with Agartha or say they are connected. According to the Kalachakra Tantra, Shambhala is a place of peace, wisdom, and enlightenment. It cannot be reached in normal ways, and only those who are spiritually ready can find the path. But things get even more interesting. In some esoteric traditions, Shambhala and Agartha are seen as twin realms. One is linked to divine order, the other is linked to raw power. Some call them the right hand and the left hand. Others say that Shambhala exists on a higher, spiritual level, while Agartha is more physical. In both cases, they are said to be hidden inside or beneath the earth, and both are described as protectors of ancient knowledge. Now let's cross oceans and deserts and head into the highlands of North America. Among the Hopi people of Arizona, there are old legends about a time when the surface of the earth was destroyed twice, first by fire and then by ice. During these disasters, the Hopi say they were helped by celestial beings. These beings led them to the ant people, who took them into large underground chambers where they could survive. These ant people, called the Anu Sinom, taught the Hopi how to store food, how to grow crops in the dark, and how to live in harmony with nature. The Hopi also say that ants have narrow waist today because they shared so much of their own food with the Hopi during those hard times. Then there's also a curious detail in their language. The Hopi word for ant is Anu, and their word for friends is Naki. Put together, they form the word Anunnaki. This is a striking parallel to the ancient Sumerian beings who, in some versions, came from the sky or from deep within the earth to guide early humans. And this idea that advanced, non-human or semi-human beings live beneath the earth and occasionally interact with us repeats again and again. These myths aren't exactly the same, but they have clear similarities. They all talk about a world beneath the surface and beings with advanced knowledge. But how is it possible that so many different civilizations, living in different times and places, told such similar stories? Maybe they were in contact with ancient cultures that didn't disappear but went underground. And if that's true, then there must be space beneath our feet for an advanced civilization. And that brings us to the Hollow Earth theory. Some of the first ideas that the Earth might not be solid go back to the 1600s. At that time, scientists and philosophers were trying to explain strange things, like the Earth's magnetic field. One of the first to suggest a hollow Earth was Edmund Halley. He was the English astronomer known for Halley's Comet. In 1692, Halley said the Earth might be made of several layers like spheres inside each other. He believed these layers spun at different speeds, and he meant it seriously. He even thought there could be air between them, maybe even life. He also said light might come from deep inside the Earth. In the early 1800s, an American named John Cleves Sims Jr. went even further. He believed the Earth was hollow and had huge openings at the north and south poles. He said these were doors to the inner world. He believed people could actually travel inside the Earth. Because of that, he spent years trying to raise money for an expedition. But unfortunately for him, he found nothing. Later, in the early 20th century, Marshall Gardner built on this theory and introduced an even more elaborate vision. He claimed that the planet was entirely hollow and contained a central sun, a smaller glowing sphere suspended in the middle of the Earth. According to Gardner, this inner sun provided warmth and light for a lush inner ecosystem. He said there was a whole ecosystem down there, with plants, animals, and maybe even people, and in that world everything was different. Gravity inside the Earth doesn't work the same as it does on the surface. Some theories say that as you move into the inner shell, gravity changes direction. Instead of pulling you straight down, it starts pulling you toward the inside wall of the Earth. So there's no longer one clear down. Directions start to lose meaning. Movement feels lighter and easier. Some people also believe that time flows differently in this inner world. According to those who go inside, 1 minute there can feel like an hour on the surface. Clocks stop working normally. Time seems to stretch or shrink depending on where you are. The closer you get to the inner sun, the more it feels like time is bending. In this version of the hollow Earth, the planet is shaped like a toroid, something like a donut or a spinning ring. In this shape, energy moves in a constant loop. It flows in through one pole and out through the other. Some say this energy is what keeps the inner sun floating in the center. It also helps support life inside the Earth. This energy might also explain strange things that explorers have noticed near the poles, like compasses that spin or freeze, or places where GPS and navigation tools stop working. But where is the entrance? If there really is a vast inner world beneath our feet, how can we reach it? According to legend, there isn't just one doorway to Agartha, but several. One of the most frequently cited locations is deep in the Himalayas. Mount Kailash. Mount Kailash isn't as tall as Mount Everest, but no one has ever reached its summit. Not because it's too hard to climb, but because something always seems to stop people from going all the way. According to local belief, only one person, the Buddhist monk Milarepa, ever reached the top. And even he was said to have done it not by climbing, but through spiritual means. Some theorists claim Kailash is not a mountain at all, but an ancient pyramid. In esoteric tradition, it's thought to be one of the main portals into Agartha. Saint Yves d'Alvedre, the man who first introduced Agartha to the Western world, said that its entrance was hidden beneath the Himalayas, and surprisingly, he said Tibetan monks were the ones who guarded it. Later, other explorers like Ferdinand Ossendowski heard similar stories. Monks in Tibet told them about tunnels under the mountains. These tunnels, they said, lead to a huge underground world ruled by a mysterious king of the world. On the other side of the globe, Mount Shasta in Northern California is tied to another powerful legend. Here, the story shifts from Tibetan monks to the mythical Lemurians. They were survivors of an ancient lost continent. According to the legend, they built an underground city called Telos beneath Mount Shasta. But over time, Mount Shasta has been a magnet for spiritual seekers and adventurers alike. People talk about strange lights, mysterious disappearances, and sightings of tall, robed beings in the forest. In 1987, it became a gathering point for the harmonic convergence, linking it to global spiritual energy and interdimensional portals. Whether these beings are remnants of Lemuria or connected to Agartha, many believe the tunnel systems below Mount Shasta lead straight to the inner Earth. Then there's Egypt. Beneath the Great Pyramid of Giza, near the ancient Sphinx, lies an entrance said to lead directly into Agartha. Recent discoveries have revealed previously unknown chambers and subterranean tunnels beneath the plateau. These findings challenge everything we've been told that the pyramids were mere tombs. They are perfectly lined up with stars in Orion's belt. Their shapes and sizes follow exact math. The way they were built is too advanced for the time. That's why many people think they weren't built by regular humans. This is where the Hall of Records comes in. It's a hidden room that many believe is under the Sphinx. They say it holds lost knowledge from before the Great Flood. The Sphinx then might not be just a statue. Maybe the Sphinx isn't guarding treasure, but the truth about the Hollow Earth. The next possible entrance is Mount Rushmore. Most people see it as a national monument. It shows the faces of 4 American presidents. But behind those faces, a doorway was recently discovered. For a long time, no one knew it was there. And if there's a door, it must lead somewhere, right? Many say it leads to a hidden room called the Hall of Records. This room was supposed to store important documents, but it was never finished. Today it is sealed and no one is allowed to enter. If it's sealed and people aren't allowed in, that usually means something is being hidden. Now add to that the location. Mount Rushmore stands in the Black Hills of South Dakota. For centuries, native tribes have said this land is sacred. They believe it holds powerful energy, so it's no surprise that many people think this door doesn't lead to a room with old papers. They believe it leads straight into Agartha. But the place most people believe is connected to Agartha is even farther south. We're talking about Antarctica. Many say that deep beneath that ice lies one of the most closely guarded entrances to the inner Earth. In the late 1930s, Nazi Germany launched an expedition to this frozen continent. Officially, it was a scientific mission, but it didn't take long for rumors to grow around it. According to these stories, the Nazis didn't just study the terrain, they built an underground base. They called it Base 211, or New Schwabenland. But many believe it wasn't a shelter at all. They think the Nazis found pathways that lead directly into the inner Earth. The base may have been just a cover and an excuse to stay and explore without being questioned. Or maybe it was built not to hide from the world above, but to connect with the world below. Just after World War II, in 1946, the United States launched Operation High Jump, led by Admiral Richard E. Byrd. It was one of the largest military expeditions to Antarctica ever assembled, involving ships, planes, thousands of troops, and a significant amount of secrecy. The reason for the expedition was to test equipment in extreme cold, or at least that is what they told us. But the mission was cut short and much shorter than planned, and what happened next only added to the mystery. According to a secret diary later attributed to Admiral Byrd, he saw something no one expected. In his diary, Byrd describes flying beyond the South Pole into a warm land, lush and green, with strange animals and an advanced civilization. He writes of encountering beings who warned him about the state of the surface world, expressing concern over our path of destruction. Byrd called this place the land beyond the poles. Now, if this diary is real, then Admiral Byrd didn't just stumble upon a new continent. He may have crossed the threshold into Agartha itself. And on top of that, Antarctica continues to be surrounded by restricted zones, unexplained magnetic anomalies, and international treaties that strictly limit civilian access. Could these measures be about environmental protection? Maybe, but many believe they serve another purpose: to keep what's underneath hidden. The Amazon rainforest is another entrance to Agartha. Indigenous tribes speak of portals hidden deep in the jungle, guarded by nature and time. There are stories of glowing caverns, lost cities swallowed by vines, and guardians who appear only when the uninvited get too close. In many parts of the Amazon, people disappear without explanation. Those who return speak of strange lights and voices in the dark. In these places, compasses fail, and the jungle itself seems to breathe. Hidden within that living green maze are said to be the ancient doors, remnants of a civilization that went below long ago and never returned. It's no coincidence that some of the earliest references to Agartha-like worlds come from South America. Even without written language, oral traditions preserved across centuries continue to describe a great kingdom below, accessed only by those who are called. Beyond the entrances we've already explored, there are many others, from Mount Epomeo in Italy to the lost trails of King Solomon's mines. But knowing where the doors are isn't enough to open them and to enter Agartha. You can't enter by walking or digging, because Agartha isn't just protected by distance or terrain, but by frequency as well. Some modern theories say that Agartha exists on a different frequency than our world. Think of it like a hidden radio station. It's always on, but you can only hear it if you're tuned in just right. That means these entrances don't open just because of where you are. They open based on your energy. Only when a person is in the right state, spiritually, emotionally, and even physically, can the gate appear. This idea shows up in many stories as well. Explorers lost in caves who suddenly find glowing rooms. Monks who say the tunnels open only to those who are pure. It's said that if someone isn't ready, they won't even see the entrance, even if it's right in front of them. But even that isn't enough, because these entrances are not unguarded. In Antarctica, they're guarded by beings known as the Wall Guardians. In Tibet, the entrances are protected by monks trained to guard ancient secrets. In Egypt, the guardian is the Sphinx. In South America, shamans warn of sacred paths that lead not to gold, but to silence. And then there are the quiet watchers, those in secret societies, hidden orders, or even positions of power, who know more than they say. Some claim that entire governments have knowledge of Agartha's location and are actively keeping it from public view. But why hide it? Well, the answer might be simpler than you think. According to those who guard the story, we are not ready for what is down there. What if the Arctic wasn't always a frozen wasteland? What if, hidden beneath the endless sheets of ice, once thrived a civilization so advanced that the Greeks described it as a paradise beyond the north wind? They called it Hyperborea. This was a land of eternal sunlight, a place where winters never came, and people lived free of sickness and war. To the Greeks, it wasn't fantasy. For centuries, scholars dismissed these tales as mere myth. Hyperborea was tagged as a poetic exaggeration from a culture obsessed with divine ideals. But here's the problem. Modern science has uncovered evidence that the Arctic wasn't always icy. Geological studies show that during the Holocene warm periods, the poles were temperate. That is, they were lush, green, and even habitable. So, let's dig into it. Was Hyperborea just an imagination, or a distorted memory of a lost age? If civilizations like Egypt and Sumer preserved fragments of Atlantis in their myths, could the Greeks have preserved Hyperborea in theirs? It would interest you to know this. The Hyperborea studies don't just suggest fertile lands. It also talks of beings unlike any others, people who were tall, radiant, and long-lived. What's more, they wielded technologies that could go as far as harnessing consciousness itself. A people who lived not by the grind of survival, but in harmony with celestial laws. But if they truly existed, what happened to them? To the Greeks, Hyperborea wasn't some far-off dream, it was a geographic reality. The name itself means beyond Boreas, the god of the north wind. This means it was a land north of Thrace, beyond the icy blasts of winter. But here's the twist. In Hyperborea, the sun never sets. This led ancient poets like Pindar to describe it as a paradise where night itself seemed banished. How could they imagine such a thing? Modern science gives us a clue. Above the Arctic Circle, there are months when the sun truly doesn't set. To Mediterranean cultures, this must have sounded like magic. But to the Greeks, it was proof that a real people lived there. People so blessed to have existed in what seemed like the very threshold between earth and heaven. But this threshold was inaccessible. Ancient philosopher Friedrich Nietzsche once wrote, "Neither by sea nor land can you find the road to the Hyperboreans." At first glance, it does look poetic. But historians argue that his lines reflected a mystery, especially when historians learned that travelers could go north, but something always stopped them. Sometimes it was impassable mountains, other times it was a dangerous storm, yet fragments of testimony claimed some had reached it. Diodorus Siculus spoke of a magnificent island the size of Sicily, located far in the north, rich with fertile fields and temples of incredible size. Pilgrims, he said, traveled there in honor of Apollo, whose worship was central to the Hyperboreans. Think about it. If this is a myth, why describe geography so precisely? Why insist on temples, rituals, and pilgrimages if it were just an allegory? The Greek historians seem to know that Hyperborea was real. The question was not whether it existed, but why it was hidden. What truly set Hyperborea apart wasn't just its geography. The people are worthy of discussion. Ancient texts describe the Hyperboreans as tall, radiant, and ageless. People who lived in perfect harmony with nature. They knew no war, no disease, or decay. Ancient Greek poet Pindar wrote that their lives were spent in songs, dances, and sacrifices to the gods. To modern ears, this sounds unreal. How could their lives be so happy and simple? But in reality, not only were they happy northerners, they represented a higher state of being. That is, humans before the fall who were untouched by corruption. If this is true, then Hyperborea isn't just a myth. Hyperborea is our forgotten beginning. Let's talk about the Hyperboreans for a minute. Who were these radiant people that historians and poets could not stop describing? Ancient Greek writers painted the Hyperboreans as no ordinary humans, starting with Herodotus, an ancient Greek historian. He described them as a radiant race who lived beyond the north wind, in a land where the sun never set. How about Pindar? He spoke of them as deathless, untouched by disease or old age. Unlike mortal men, their lives stretched for centuries. Their existence was filled with music, feasts, and sacred rituals that harmonized them with the spiritual. On the subject of looks, the Hyperboreans were said to be tall, fair, and luminous. Yes, they glowed with such vitality. But that's not all. They lived for as long as 1,000 years. Can you believe that? This begs the question: could the Hyperboreans have unlocked secrets of human lifespan that science is only now rediscovering? The mystery of the Hyperboreans does not end with their age. These people weren't just admired by men, they were also beloved by gods. Here is something to help you believe. Greek mythology says that Apollo, the god of light, music, and prophecy, visited Hyperborea every 19 years. Upon his visit, it was said that he rejuvenated, feasted, and communed with his chosen people. Unlike humans elsewhere, the Hyperboreans did not worship in fear. Instead, they interacted with the divine as equals. Hyperboreans usually sent sacred offerings to Delphi, carried by swans or maidens. This bridged their Arctic homeland with the religious heart of Greece. Seeing Apollo's devotion raises a striking question. Why would one of the chief Olympian gods prefer the company of this hidden northern race over the Greeks themselves? Is there more to the Hyperboreans than we know? Perhaps the answers we seek lie in comparison to other ancient traditions. The thing is, the Hyperboreans don't stand alone in ancient memory. Across Indo-European traditions, tidbits of their story appear again and again. Vedic texts speak of the Uttarakuru, a northern land of radiant beings. Norse sagas describe Asgard and the shining Aesir gods in the far north. Even Persian myths tell of Iriana Vaya, the original Aryan homeland in a frozen northern zone. What unites these myths is the image of a luminous race, tall, long-lived, and guardians of higher wisdom. What if they are all cultural pieces pointing back to Hyperborea? The odds are alarming. Every Greek schoolboy learned that Apollo, god of light, music and prophecy, didn't stay in Delphi year-round. He left each winter and traveled north to Hyperborea, his true homeland. There, among the radiant people, Apollo was rejuvenated. Think about this. Even the god of light, whose temple at Delphi shaped Greek identity, drew his power not from Olympus, but from a civilization beyond the north wind. These were real rituals tied to geography, suggesting the Greeks knew there was a powerful cult far beyond their borders. But more than a mere ancient cult, Hyperborea had more. Diodorus Siculus wrote that in Hyperborea, there was a temple of Apollo larger than anything Greece had ever seen. Diodorus Siculus spoke about it in his work, Bibliotheca Historica. He described the temple as spherical, aligning with celestial movements. This echoed what we'd later find in Stonehenge and even the great solar temples of Egypt. How could separate cultures, thousands of miles apart, build temples that seemed to follow the same design principles? One explanation: they shared a common teacher. Could Hyperborea have been that origin point? Back then, the Greeks feared the future, so they consulted oracles. But the oracles were believed to gain their sight from Hyperborean knowledge. Herodotus even claimed that the most famous oracle, the one at Dodona, was originally a Hyperborean import. And here's where things get interesting. The Delphic oracle, which shaped wars, politics, and colonization, was tied directly to Apollo's journeys north. When the god left for Hyperborea every winter, Delphi's sacred flame dimmed. And when he returned in spring, prophecy bloomed again. This cycle showed something deeper. Prophecy itself was sustained by Hyperborean contact. Without them, the gods grew silent, and perhaps without them, Greece would have gone blind about the future. This discovery makes us wonder, were the Hyperboreans just mythical northerners, or were they the hidden teachers behind the very religion of classical Greece? Not only is Hyperborea regarded as the special ingredient behind Greece's religion, but the civilization has also been discovered to house unimaginable technology. In ancient texts, Hyperborea wasn't just a frozen wasteland, it was a radiant realm powered by crystals. Their cities had towering quartz spires that pulsed with harmonic frequencies. Most of all, they channeled Earth's natural energy fields. These weren't simple decorations. The Hyperboreans mastered piezoelectric technology. We are talking about the tech that uses pressure within massive crystals to generate power. Imagine cities lit not by fire, but by vibrational resonance. Also, in this civilization, they achieved healing through sound and crystal harmonics, tuning the human body like a living instrument. There was nothing like the adverse reactions that come from using orthodox medicines. Even today, the Arctic remains wrapped in mystery. Satellite readings reveal magnetic irregularities. On a closer look, you'll find areas where compasses spin wildly and electromagnetic fields surge far beyond natural expectations. Some scientists chalk it up to shifting poles. But counter-researchers argue something else. What if remnants of Hyperborean technology were buried beneath the ice? How about the popular machines of the north that stabilized the climate and balanced Earth's magnetism? In today's world, we call these things anomalies. But what if these anomalies are the silent echoes from Hyperborea still resonating millennia after the fall? Explorers have reported strange auroras appearing with no solar activity, as though the sky itself was responding to something below. If Hyperborea truly tapped into Earth's magnetic grid, then the anomalies aren't just geological quirks, they're fingerprints of a forgotten energy network. And if that's true, then the frozen north may be less dead than we think. Perhaps the ice hides a sleeping system waiting to be rediscovered. What makes the Hyperborean puzzle even stranger is its uncanny resemblance to Atlantis. Both civilizations are said to have built cities aligned with energy lines, powered by crystals, and stabilized by Earth's magnetic field. In Plato's dialogues, Atlanteans used fire from the earth, channeled through crystalline structures. Ancient texts describe Hyperboreans doing the same, only with greater refinement. Some researchers suggest the two were not separate at all, but twin outposts of the same global civilization. The fall of Atlantis through flood and the freezing of Hyperborea through pole shifts may have been one great disaster recorded differently in myth. If so, then the crystal grids and other forgotten technology beneath the Arctic ice are chapters of the same lost story. A story where humanity once lived in resonance with the planet itself. In Hyperborea, words were almost unnecessary. Communication happened mind to mind. Can you believe that? A place where telepathy wasn't a superpower, but a daily language. Greek accounts describe the Hyperboreans as beings of purity and clarity, living without lies or deceit. How can lies thrive? When your very thoughts can be heard, deceit becomes impossible. But here's the striking part. Modern research into brainwave synchronization and quantum entanglement suggests such communication might not be fantasy. Studies show minds can align, and even emotions can be felt across distances. Could Hyperborea have mastered what science now calls psi phenomena? Imagine a world where every intention was transparent, where harmony wasn't enforced by law but by consciousness itself. What if their peace was not necessarily a cultural choice, but a mental thing? It does not end here. To the Hyperboreans, reality wasn't limited to flesh. Ancient traditions describe them as astral voyagers who are able to leave their bodies and explore the earth and beyond. They weren't bound by the laws of gravity or distance. Think of shamans who enter trances, Tibetan monks practicing dream yoga, or the Egyptian bar soul that traveled after death. Now imagine an entire civilization living with that ability, mapping the stars constantly. If their explorers traveled astrally, maybe that's why so many ancient maps show impossible accuracy. For example, Antarctica's coastline beneath the ice. Were those maps drawn by ships or by minds? This just shows us that what science dismisses as hallucination might have once been a tool of navigation. If the out-of-body experience surprised you, brace yourself for more. The most radical claim is not that Hyperboreans used telepathy to communicate. It's that the Hyperboreans could shape matter with thought. Some sources suggest they moved stones, generated energy, and even healed wounds through consciousness. Outrageous? Maybe. But experiments in psychokinesis, though controversial, show small but consistent effects. Now compare this with the impossible feats of ancient architecture. We see monoliths weighing hundreds of tons. All these were lifted without modern cranes. What about the stones fitted so tightly that no blade can pass between them? Were Hyperborean techniques the seed of this ancient knowledge? If thought could influence matter, Hyperborea didn't just master tools, they mastered reality itself. Their temples may not have been built with brute force, but with focused resonance. They aligned mind and matter in ways we can barely imagine today. But beyond that, their cities were a wonder. Hyperborean cities weren't random clusters of stone. They were a sight to behold. Ancient Greek writers say that Hyperboreans aligned their temples with the movements of the stars. Sounds like an exaggeration, right? But their cities functioned not only as homes, but also as astronomical calendars. When you weigh the odds, the description mirrors other sacred geometries across the world. For example, the pyramids of Giza align with Orion, and even Teotihuacan mirrors the layout of the Milky Way. Could these distant cultures all be inheriting a single Hyperborean blueprint? It gets more interesting. The architecture of Hyperborea was said to have glowed with an unearthly brilliance. Temples were carved from crystalline stone that conducted energy. Imagine entire cities designed like tuning forks to match Earth's magnetic field. And when you look at modern architecture, you see shadows of this in structures that defy explanation. We're talking Baalbek's massive foundation stones, Machu Picchu's earthquake-proof walls, or Göbekli Tepe's aligned pillars from 12,000 years ago. These sites all show similar geometry. But the marvels of Hyperborea transcend their physical architecture. Did you know that Hyperborea had sacred sites that acted as gateways between worlds? Yes. Temples were deliberately placed on geomagnetic hotspots, that is, points where Earth's magnetic energy is strongest. Modern science may call them anomalies, but the ancients treated them as portals. Across cultures, the same pattern emerges. For example, Delphi's oracle built above a fissure, or Mesoamerican pyramids at magnetic nodes, or even Tibetan monasteries on ley line crossings. Makes us wonder if these uncanny resemblances are footprints of Hyperborean knowledge passed down through generations. It might interest you to discover that the architectural principles aren't the only secrets handed down by the Hyperboreans. There is more to say regarding their spirituality. What was the spiritual society of Hyperborea like? Let's start from here. Greek historians described Hyperborea as a land of never-ending sunlight, where days flowed into each other without darkness. At first glance, this sounds impossible. But in the far north, during certain periods, the sun never sets. To ancient travelers, this must have felt like stepping into a divine realm. But the Hyperboreans didn't just live under the midnight sun. They revered it. Their festivals were said to last months. They did this to match the celestial cycles. Some scholars even suggest their entire calendar revolved around solar rhythms, blending astronomy with spirituality. Imagine living in a society where time itself wasn't dictated by clocks, but by the living cosmos. Could this explain why Hyperboreans were seen as closer to the gods? Perhaps they weren't worshippers of the sun, but partners in its energy, a crazy thought in itself. Even crazier is this thought. Was their connection to light the key to their long lifespans? In addition, the kind of peace experienced by the Hyperboreans is too surreal. Ancient texts insist the Hyperboreans lived in a world without disease, aging, or war. They were described as a people of peace, untouched by the violence that consumed other civilizations. But how could such a society exist? Perhaps their advanced technology eliminated scarcity, removing the root causes of conflict. Or perhaps their spiritual training suppressed ego-driven competition. In Greek accounts, the Hyperboreans not only avoid war, they actively radiated harmony, influencing surrounding nations. What was their source? Is this why Apollo, god of healing and prophecy, was said to spend his winters among them? A society without war sounds utopian, but what if it's only unthinkable because humanity forgot it was once possible? The most shocking declaration about the Hyperboreans is their extraordinary lifespan. Some accounts say they lived for hundreds of years, never aging as we do. Could this have been due to the environment alone? When you consider the clean air, crystal energy, and perfect diet, it seems like a good enough deal. Or was it their mastery of consciousness? Did it allow them to slow biological decay? Ancient mystics believed thought itself could extend life, and Hyperborea may have been the living proof. Texts describe them as free from old age and disease. Their deaths only came when they chose to die, and the departures were celebrated as conscious transitions, not tragedies. Instead of fear, they embraced death as a gateway to higher dimensions. What if aging, as we know it, isn't natural at all, but a symptom of lost knowledge? The Greeks didn't imagine Hyperborea as a distant myth. Instead, they believed their own culture was shaped by it. Every year they told of sacred offerings sent from Hyperborea to Delphi, the spiritual center of Greece. Like we stated before, Apollo himself was said to retreat to Hyperborea each winter. And since Apollo was an ancient Greek god, the nation had no choice but to acknowledge its solemn connection to Hyperborea. Imagine a beautiful paradise with empires suddenly crumbling underneath ice. This is how Hyperborea ended. It is established that Hyperborea is a land of eternal spring. Nevertheless, geological evidence indicates rapid pole shifts that could have transformed warm climates into frozen wastelands almost overnight. Scientists now admit the poles have shifted before, altering weather and habitability on a global scale. This brings us to ask, what if Hyperborea's fall wasn't gradual, but catastrophic, a swift flash freeze that buried cities under ice within days? Most likely. The mammoths of Siberia suggest exactly such an event. This is because they were discovered with undigested food in their stomachs. Could Hyperborea's people have faced the same fate? If so, their civilization didn't simply decline, it was erased in an instant. To the outside world, the exact cause of Hyperborea's disappearance is not known, but historians think otherwise. Aside from a sudden ice cataclysm, there are other possible factors. Across the ancient world, we know of a deluge. Some myths say it came in the form of great earthquakes and fire raining from the heavens. Plato even tied Atlantis' fall to violent floods. Could Hyperborea have met a similar end? In other books, some researchers connect Hyperborea's destruction to comet impacts or solar flares that destabilized Earth's climate. Ancient traditions align too. From the Norse Ragnarok, where fire and ice consume the world, to Native American tales of sky stones that caused flooding. Since Hyperborea sat at Earth's magnetic crown, any cosmic event striking the poles would have devastated it first. Perhaps their mastery of Earth's energies couldn't shield them from the heavens. Was this punishment by the gods, or just the cruel result of heavenly cycles? But here's the twist. The legends don't say Hyperborea vanished entirely. They say its people migrated south. Legends from Greece to India describe luminous northern teachers, bringing agriculture, astronomy, and spiritual lore. Archaeology reveals sudden bursts of advanced knowledge appearing across Eurasia, and they are all too sudden to be a coincidence. So, did Hyperborea truly die? Or did it disperse to camouflage itself in the rise of later empires? Once upon a time, you could open any map from the 1500s through to the 1800s and find a massive territory labeled Tartaria, or Grand Tartary. This was no little kingdom. We're talking about an empire that stretched from Eastern Europe across Asia. But suddenly Grand Tartary disappeared without a trace. What happened to the once magnificent civilization? Did they disappear naturally, or is there more to the sudden vanishing? Before we dive into the conspiracy, let's start with the most undeniable evidence of all: the maps. Take a look at maps from the 1500s to 1800s. For over 3 centuries, European cartographers showed a vast region called Tartaria, or Grand Tartary. These weren't rough sketches or fantasy maps. One look and you'll see the empire dominating huge swaths of Asia. Spanning from the Caspian Sea to the Pacific Ocean, and from Siberia down into Central Asia, some maps even show independent Tartary, Chinese Tartary, and Russian Tartary. This suggests not just one region, but multiple Tartarian territories. But here's the thing. How does a landmass this enormous just disappear? If you still wonder whether the empire did exist, you should see this. Different European nations' maps all show consistent descriptions of Tartarian territories. French maps, Dutch maps, German maps, you name it. They all agree on where Tartaria was located and how large it was. That's not the kind of consistency you'd expect if map makers were just making stories. But in the 1800s, Tartaria began to leave maps, not gradually, no, but suddenly, like someone decided that this empire should no longer exist on paper. The question is, how did this happen? Think about it. At first, there were hundreds of historical maps documenting this empire over 3 centuries, and then, nothing. Modern atlases contain no trace of it. Geography textbooks never mention it. It's as if an entire chapter of world history was torn out of the books. But if Tartaria was just a misunderstood term for scattered nomadic tribes, why would anyone bother to erase it so thoroughly? And more importantly, what happened to all those grand cities and territories that the maps clearly showed? The answer might be more shocking than you think. At around the time this empire was vanishing from maps, something extraordinary was happening across America and Europe. Suddenly, grand buildings began appearing everywhere, and we mean everywhere. Massive structures with intricate stonework and architectural details that would challenge modern engineers. Government buildings, train stations, exhibition halls, and even entire city centers. What's more, they were constructed with speed during the late 1800s to early 1900s. The big question is, who gave the engineers such advanced knowledge? Before we answer that, there's a problem. The timeline doesn't add up. In 1906, there was a devastating earthquake in San Francisco, but before anyone could tell what was happening, the city rebuilt itself with jaw-dropping structures, and they did so in a few years. Knowing the effects of such a major disaster, it should take years to recover from the aftermath. But somehow, they found the resources and skilled craftsmen to erect buildings that still marvel today's engineers. How did they achieve such a feat? Could it be that they received external help from Tartarians? If you're still in doubt, let's consider Chicago's World's Columbian Exposition in 1893. In the books, records say that this white city, which spans over 600 acres of elaborate neoclassical buildings, was designed and constructed in just 2 years. 2 years. Can you believe that? These are uniquely crafted buildings that would normally take skilled craftsmen decades to complete. The official explanation? These were temporary structures built with plaster and staff, a mixture of plaster, cement, and fiber. But look at the photographs. Do these buildings look temporary to you? Of course not. These bear the mark of equipped engineers. But this is where it gets really suspicious. Shortly after the exposition ended, the incredible buildings were demolished, every single one of them. The reason given by the government? The buildings were only meant to be temporary. But think about it. If you invested huge amounts of money into erecting a building, would you just tear it down immediately? It makes no sense. Because of this irrational act, Tartarian theorists shook the world with the big question: what if they were trying to eliminate the last evidence of the Tartarian Empire? If you wonder about the origin of such suspicion, let's take a look at the theorists' proposal. Firstly, these buildings were not constructed for the exhibition fairs like we were made to believe. No. Instead, they already existed. Crazy, right? The thing is, from the 1500s to the 1800s, the Tartarians left a mark. Since they were an advanced civilization, the buildings they erected showed the same excellence. The Tartarian theorists proposed that the government never erected any temporary buildings for the fair. Instead, They renovated the already standing Tartarian structures, then destroyed them afterward. Now let's look at the architectural style itself. These buildings shared remarkably similar design elements no matter where they were built. The same classical columns, the same ornate domes, the same precise stonework. Whether you were looking at a building in Chicago, San Francisco, or St. Petersburg, Russia, they all looked similar. How do you explain that level of consistency across different nations, different construction crews, and different periods, unless they weren't built by different people at all? Still, you won't believe the next card played by Tartarian theorists. They proposed a staggering idea that the architectural evidence goes even deeper than the world's fairs. Perhaps the Tartarian Empire didn't just disappear, it was buried. A walk through any major city built before 1900, and you'll notice something strange. Buildings that appear to be sinking into the ground. First floors that have become basements. Windows that now sit at sidewalk level, looking up at passers-by like the eyes of buried giants. Tartaria theorists call this the evidence of the Great Mud Flood. What is the Great Mud Flood? You wonder. In the 1800s, a catastrophic event visited the land, taking many cities with it. This includes hundreds of Tartarian cities getting lost under layers of mud and debris. According to the Great Mud Flood theory, a massive geological disaster struck the planet, destroying the advanced Tartarian civilization and leaving only the upper floors of their buildings visible. But where is the evidence that this tragedy ever happened? Their response. The evidence is everywhere. In Seattle, entire blocks of buildings show their original ground floors buried beneath modern street level. The famous Seattle Underground isn't just a random tourist attraction, it's proof that the city was once built on a completely different ground level. And guess what? It's not just in Seattle. Enter New York City's subway system, which shows the same pattern. From time to time, construction workers keep uncovering such precise handiwork far beneath the modern city. While the government calls them tourist attractions and makes money off these architectural wonders, nobody bothers to question their origin. And a majority of origins point back to Grand Tartary. Remember the San Francisco earthquake we talked about earlier? It's the second piece of evidence. After the 1906 earthquake, reconstruction plans became the order of the day. But during the reconstruction process, the workers came across really interesting pieces. Instead of finding rubble after the natural disaster, what they found were intact design features, elaborate facades that had been buried for decades. Since this coincides with the period when the Tartarian Empire disappeared, historians wonder, did these architectural pieces come from Grand Tartary? As a counter, mainstream historians offer a simpler explanation for the Great Mud Flood. Their name for it: urban development. They argue that street levels naturally rise over time as new construction builds upon old foundations. Roads get paved and repaved, raising the ground level. Buildings get renovated, with new entrances built at the current street level. But is this really the case? Of course, Tartarian researchers argue this explanation doesn't fully account for their observations, especially since we're not talking about a few inches or even a few feet of gradual change. Entire floors appear to have been buried beneath the modern ground level. What could have caused this, if not the Great Mud Flood? And let's not forget the suspicious timing. Why would this phenomenon appear so consistently across the globe during the same historical period when Tartaria was disappearing from maps? Why would the buried architecture show such remarkable similarity in style and sophistication? The mud flood hypothesis suggests that this wasn't gradual urban development at all. It was the burial of evidence of a civilization that someone desperately wanted hidden beneath the earth. The theory gets more daring. It proposes that the world's fairs of the late 1800s and early 1900s weren't just normal celebrations. According to Tartaria theorists, they were cover-ups. Think about it. How do you hide an entire lost civilization? How do you explain away magnificent buildings that precede the official timeline? Simple. Claim you built them yourself, show them off to the world, and then destroy the evidence. The timeline alone is the biggest red flag. In 1893, the Chicago World's Fair covered 600 acres with over 200 buildings, including huge structures like the Manufactures and Liberal Arts Building. At the time, this was the largest building in the world. The official engineering records say that this entire complex was designed and constructed in just 24 months. But even modern-day engineers find such a swift timeline nearly impossible. Before you agree, let's break down what that would require. The Manufactures building alone covered 44 acres under a single roof. Its central hall could have fit the US Capitol, the Great Pyramid of Giza, Winchester Cathedral, Madison Square Garden, and St. Paul's Cathedral, all at the same time, with room to spare. Can you imagine that? The building featured intricate ironwork, complex glass exteriors, and structural details that would leave modern construction crews in awe. And we're supposed to believe this was all accomplished in less than 2 years using 1890s technology, and by workers who had never attempted anything remotely similar before. Doesn't it make you wonder too? The 1915 Panama Pacific International Exposition in San Francisco presents an even more impossible timeline. Just 9 years after the devastating 1906 earthquake had reduced much of the city to rubble, San Francisco allegedly constructed an elaborate fairground. This fairground featured the magnificent Palace of Fine Arts and dozens of other engineering wonders. The official story tells us that these structures were built specifically for the exposition using temporary materials. But examine the photographs closely. Does this look like temporary architecture to you? It does not. But this is where they forgot to clear their tracks. Despite the scale and supposed temporary nature of these structures, very few detailed construction photographs exist. We have plenty of images of the finished buildings and their demolition, but remarkably little documentation of the actual construction process. Why is this so? If not because there wasn't any construction to document. If that made you stop in your tracks, this next Tartarian excellence will amaze you. Do you know star forts? They are unique geometric structures with precise angular shapes that appear in many places in the world. Europe, North America, and Asia, you name it. Tartaria researchers point to the mysterious star forts found across the globe. They suggest that the origin is Grand Tartary. Don't take a deep breath yet. While counter-historians classify them as military fortifications designed to withstand cannon fire, the other side says otherwise. One look at their geometric precision, and you'll notice that it doesn't fit the military explanation. The structures of the star forts follow mathematical principles that seem more suited to energy manipulation than defense. The angles, the proportions, the positioning. Everything about star forts screams they were designed according to principles of resonance and electromagnetic field manipulation. They weren't built to keep armies out. They were built to channel and focus energy. To make matters worse, there's the acoustic evidence. Step inside any great cathedral or government building from this era, and you'll immediately notice the incredible acoustic properties. Your voice carries in ways that seem almost supernatural. You'll hear that the sounds resonate and amplify with such amazing accuracy. Tartaria theorists argue that these weren't designed for better church sermons or political speeches. They were built as massive resonance chambers, spaces designed to amplify sound frequencies for technological purposes. Here is where it makes sense. Recent research shows that certain frequencies can influence matter at the molecular level. Sound waves can levitate objects, break down materials, and even alter the properties of water and other substances. What if the Tartarians had mastered this technology centuries before we even understood the principles involved? The implications are staggering. Imagine a civilization that could power entire cities without burning fossil fuels, move massive stone blocks using sound frequencies, and even transmit energy and information across vast distances without any physical infrastructure. Feels like a virtual reality game, right? This explains how the Tartarians could construct such massive buildings so quickly and with such accuracy. It also explains the undeniable consistency of building styles across different continents, and it might explain why this civilization had to be erased from history. Because if free energy technology existed, if it was really possible to power the world without oil, coal, or nuclear fuel, that knowledge would threaten the entire foundation of the modern economic system. And no government would have liked that idea. And if the Tartarians possessed such advanced technology, what happened to it? And why don't we see any evidence of these energy systems in operation today? The answer might be more disturbing than the theory itself. But before we go into that, here's where the Tartarian mystery takes its most incredible turn. If this advanced civilization existed and built these massive structures using free energy technology, there's a burning question we need to ask. What did the Tartarians themselves look like? The answer is both simple and shocking. They were giants. Walk through any grand building constructed during the Tartarian era, and you'll immediately notice something odd about the proportions. Doorways that tower 12, 15, and even 20 feet high. Staircases with steps so large that normal-sized people have to stretch to climb them comfortably. Ceilings that are 3 times higher than what we see today. Who would use such towering designs if not giants? Mainstream historians try to explain this as grandeur for grandeur's sake. This is the idea that architects simply wanted to create impressive spaces that would awe visitors. But Tartaria theorists propose a different explanation. These buildings weren't designed to impress normal-sized humans. They were designed for inhabitants who were significantly taller. Consider the furniture depicted in photographs from the late 1800s. Chairs with seats positioned unusually high off the ground. Tables that seem oversized even for their grand surroundings. Beds that appear massive even by the standards of luxury accommodations. There is more evidence pointing to a gigantic race. The historical accounts speak for themselves. During the 1800s and early 1900s, newspapers across America regularly reported discoveries of giant skeletons. Not just 1 or 2 isolated incidents, but dozens of documented findings. The Smithsonian Institution's records from this period mention numerous acquisitions of unusually large human remains, found during construction projects, mining operations, and archaeological projects. Skeletons measuring 7, 8, and even 9 feet in height, with bone structure that suggested they belonged to a distinct race of humans. But here's where it gets suspicious. If you try to find any of these giant skeletons in museum collections today, you would be wasting your time. They've all vanished. According to Tartaria theorists, the Smithsonian and other institutions systematically removed these remains from public view, either destroying them or storing them in private collections where researchers can't access them. The big question is, why? We lack the answer too. The thing is, the cover-up theory extends beyond just hiding bones. Some researchers claim that historical photographs from the late 1800s were deliberately edited to make people appear normal-sized to match the buildings around them. It gets even more interesting. Cultural memory springs up piece of evidence. Nearly every ancient civilization has legends of giants, beings who were larger and more powerful than ordinary humans. Greek mythology speaks of titans. The Bible mentions Nephilim. Norse legends describe enormous warriors. Native American tribes across the continent have stories of giant races that once inhabited their lands. What if these weren't just myths and legends? What if they were cultural memories of actual encounters with a race of giant humans, the Tartarians themselves? This would explain the large scale of Tartarian architecture. It would explain why these buildings seem designed for inhabitants much larger than ourselves. And it would provide yet another reason why evidence of this civilization had to be systematically erased from history. Acknowledging the existence of a race of giants would fundamentally challenge our understanding of human evolution and development. It would raise uncomfortable questions about what happened to these beings and why modern humans inherited their world. Everything you know about how you came to be would suddenly look false. But soon enough, another query rose to the surface. If the Tartarians were truly giants with advanced technology, how did they disappear so completely? And who had the power to erase all evidence of their existence from the historical record? The answer leads us to the darkest aspect of the Tartarian conspiracy: their disappearance. What we're talking about isn't just the disappearance of one civilization. According to Tartaria theorists, we're looking at evidence of the most massive historical cover-up in human history. Most likely a deliberate, coordinated effort to rewrite our entire understanding of the past. They call it the Great Reset. This is not the recent economic theory, but a much older and more sinister process of erasing inconvenient truths from the historical record. Consider the timing of major catastrophic events in the 1800s and early 1900s. The Great Chicago Fire of 1871, the San Francisco earthquake of 1906, World War I from 1914 to 1918, the Spanish flu pandemic, World War II. Mainstream historians see these as unrelated tragedies, natural disasters, conflicts, and diseases that shape the modern world. But Tartaria theorists propose something far more disturbing. These weren't random events. They were coordinated attacks designed to destroy evidence of the Tartarian civilization. Wait, what? Yes. They suggest that the Great Chicago Fire is particularly suspicious. Official records claim it started when Mrs. O'Leary's cow kicked over a lantern in her barn. But examine the destruction pattern, and you'll notice something odd. The fire specifically targeted the most elaborate and architecturally significant buildings in the city, while leaving simpler structures largely untouched. If this is true, then the cover-up may be more extensive than even Tartaria theorists realize. Tartaria might not be the only advanced civilization that's been erased from our history. However, the most compelling evidence comes from historical photography. Examine photographs of major cities taken in the late 1800s, and you'll notice something deeply unsettling. The streets are empty. We're not talking about light foot traffic or quiet neighborhoods. Look at the major metropolitan areas, New York, London, Paris, Berlin, that appear virtually abandoned. Wide boulevards stretch for blocks without a single person visible. Grand public squares sit completely vacant. Entire city centers look like elaborate movie sets waiting for actors to arrive. This is suspicious. The conventional explanation for this involves photographic technology. Early cameras required long exposure times, and moving people simply didn't register in the final image. But this explanation starts to break down when you consider the scale of what we're seeing. These aren't just streets with fewer people than expected. These are photographs of massive urban centers that appear to have been completely abandoned. Where are the carriages? Where are the street vendors? Where are the basic signs of urban life that you'd expect in any functioning city? The empty streets in historical photographs might indeed be explained by long exposure times, combined with the fact that 19th century urban centers were genuinely less crowded than modern cities. But acknowledging these conventional explanations doesn't mean we should dismiss every aspect of the Tartarian mystery. So again we ask, what happened to Grand Tartary? You tell us what you think in the comments. And don't forget to like and subscribe so you never miss a new upload. Keep your minds open, and until we meet again,